I paid $15,000 to treat my family to a luxurious Christmas dinner. I sat alone in an empty Michelin-starred restaurant, watching my own mother mock my empty bank account on a live broadcast. My family abandoned me for a mansion they bought with my stolen future. They laughed. They cheered. They thought I was a failure. They had no idea the elderly man walking into my private dining room was about to hand me the keys to their destruction. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who severely underestimated your worth. My name is Lily. I am 34 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. I work as a freelance event coordinator, or at least that is what my family believes. The clock on the wall of the private VIP dining room at Le Bernardin ticked past 8:30 in the evening. I sat completely alone at a table set perfectly for 6 people. The crystal glasses gleamed under the warm ambient lighting. The silver cutlery rested perfectly beside porcelain plates. I had paid a non-refundable $15,000 deposit to secure this room. For months I had saved and planned to treat my family to a Christmas dinner they would never forget. I wanted to show them that I was doing well, that I was finally successful enough to treat them to the finest dining experience in Chicago. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be valued. I wanted to be a part of them. I picked up my phone and dialed my mother, Catherine, for the 5th time. The call went straight to voicemail. I dialed my father, Richard, next. Voicemail again. Finally, I tried my younger sister, Kenzie. The automated voice informed me that the subscriber was unavailable. A cold knot formed in my stomach as I stared at the empty chairs surrounding me. I was alone. I was completely alone. I was alone in a room designed for 6. The waiters hovered outside the glass doors exchanging sympathetic glances. I felt the familiar sting of rejection creeping up my throat, but I forced myself to take a deep breath and opened Instagram, hoping to see if maybe they were just stuck in traffic. The very first thing that popped up on my feed was a live video notification from Kenzie. I clicked on it, and the vibrant, noisy atmosphere of a holiday party blasted through my phone speaker. The screen showed a massive, newly purchased North Shore mansion. The foyer was decorated with an extravagant 20-foot Christmas tree dripping in gold ornaments. There stood my entire family: Richard, Catherine, Kenzie, and her husband, DeAndre. DeAndre is a tall, sharply dressed man who always carried himself with the unearned arrogance of a billionaire. He called himself a venture capitalist, though his actual business practices were a closely guarded secret. My family worshipped the ground he walked on. In the video, they were all clinking expensive champagne glasses, their faces flushed with joy and luxury. Then my mother, Catherine, stepped into the frame, her voice ringing out clearly over the music. "Thank God we skipped that cramped, cheap dinner tonight," she laughed, leaning into Kenzie. "Christmas is finally perfect without Lily and her depressing broke energy dragging us down." The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I stopped breathing. My own mother was broadcasting her disdain for me to thousands of Kenzie's followers. I had spent my entire life trying to earn her approval. I had excelled in school, stayed out of trouble, and worked myself to the bone. But none of it mattered because I was not Kenzie. I was never going to be Kenzie. Then DeAndre chimed in, wrapping his arm around Kenzie and smirking directly at the camera. He raised his glass toward his wealthy friends standing in the background. "If your parents had not taken Lily's college tuition to fund Kenzie's startup, we would not be standing in this mansion today," he boasted loudly. "Investing in a loser is a bad financial move. We only back winners in this family." Kenzie giggled and kissed his cheek while my parents nodded in eager agreement. I sat there in the silent dining room watching my traumatic past being turned into a casual dinner joke for the internet. 10 years ago, my parents had emptied the college savings account my grandmother had left for me. They took every single cent and handed it to Kenzie so she could launch her fake luxury lifestyle influencer brand. I was forced to drop out of schoolwork, 3 exhausting jobs, and claw my way through life while they celebrated Kenzie as the golden child. DeAndre constantly mocked my modest lifestyle, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife's initial success was built entirely on my stolen future. A bad financial move. I was a bad financial move. My life was a bad financial move. The repetition of his words echoed in my mind, drowning out the soft restaurant music. I simply pushed the phone away. The humiliation was absolute. I picked up a fork and began to eat the cold appetizer the waiter had brought earlier, swallowing my tears along with the food. I would not let them see me break. I would not give them the satisfaction of my absolute despair. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors of the VIP room opened. I braced myself, expecting the restaurant manager to ask me to leave. Instead, a familiar figure stepped inside. It was Grandpa Henry, the only family member who had not attended the mansion party. Grandpa Henry was 81 years old, a quiet man who lived a supposedly modest life in a retirement community. He wore his usual worn tweed jacket and walked with a simple wooden cane. He did not say a word as he slowly made his way to the table and pulled out the chair directly across from me. He looked at my tear-stained face, then at the 5 empty chairs, and finally at the extravagant spread of untouched food. He did not offer any empty pity or shallow words of comfort. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a thick, heavily sealed craft envelope. He slid it across the polished wooden table until it rested right next to my plate. "Open it," he said, his voice carrying a strange, commanding weight that I had never heard from him before. I wiped my wet tears from my eyes, picked up the heavy envelope and carefully tore the seal open. I stared at the thick stack of papers inside the envelope, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled them out. These were highly confidential financial records. Grandpa Henry sat perfectly still, his sharp eyes watching my every move as I unfolded the first set of pages. It was the property deed and the mortgage agreement for the massive North Shore mansion where DeAndre and Kenzie were currently hosting their lavish Christmas party. I scanned the numbers, my background in business management allowing me to decipher the financial jargon quickly. DeAndre had not purchased that house with cash from his supposedly brilliant venture capital firm. He had taken out a deeply aggressive high-interest subprime loan. But the worst part was the guarantor section. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the names signed in black ink: Richard and Catherine. My parents had secretly put up their own fully paid-off retirement home as collateral to co-sign this massive loan for DeAndre. If he missed even a few payments, the bank would not just take the mansion. They would seize my parents' house and leave them completely destitute. They risked it all for him. They risked everything for him. They risked my past and they risked their future for him. I looked up at Grandpa Henry, completely bewildered by what I was reading. "Why would they do this?" I whispered, the sheer stupidity of their financial decision overwhelming my previous sadness. They gave him everything. Grandpa Henry leaned forward, resting his hands on the handle of his wooden cane. "Because they are blinded by the illusion of status," he replied coldly. "They worship the false wealth DeAndre projects, and they were willing to risk their entire future to buy into his fraudulent empire." Keep reading, Lily. The truth goes much deeper than a bad mortgage. I turned to the next section of the documents. The header bore the imposing logo of Onyx Capital Partners, a ruthless private equity firm known for aggressively liquidating assets when borrowers defaulted. According to these papers, Onyx Capital had recently purchased the specific portfolio containing DeAndre's subprime mortgage. DeAndre was already 2 months behind on his payments. He was actively drowning in debt while broadcasting a lifestyle of absolute luxury to the world. He was throwing a party in a house he was on the verge of losing, funded by the parents he had manipulated. But the final document in the stack was what truly made the breath catch in my throat. It was a formal transfer of ownership and a sweeping power of attorney agreement. I read the name of the primary shareholder of Onyx Capital Partners, Henry Harrington, my grandfather. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the impossible reality. "You own Onyx Capital," I asked, my voice barely more than a breathless echo. "You are a billionaire." Grandpa Henry offered a grim, satisfied smile. I spent the last 2 decades pretending to be a frail pensioner living on Social Security, he explained, his voice steady and resolute. I wanted to see the true colors of my children and grandchildren when they thought there was nothing left to inherit. I watched Richard and Catherine drain your college fund to support Kenzie's vanity projects. I watched them treat you like a servant while bowing down to a fast-talking scam artist like DeAndre. I remained silent because I needed to know who in this family possessed genuine character and who was utterly corrupted by greed. You, Lily, built your life with your own 2 hands, despite their constant sabotage. You endured their cruelty with grace. Therefore, you are the only one worthy of carrying my legacy. He reached across the table and tapped the final page of the contract. Sign it right now, he commanded softly. The moment your pen touches that paper, I am transferring my controlling shares of Onyx Capital to you. You will become the powerful chief executive officer. You will hold the absolute authority over every single asset and debt portfolio the firm manages. I looked down at the empty signature line. Onyx Capital officially owned DeAndre's outstanding debt. If I became the CEO of Onyx Capital, I would legally own the debt attached to the mansion my family was currently partying in. I would become the ultimate creditor of the very people who had spent my entire life trying to destroy my self-esteem. The sadness and humiliation that had paralyzed me just an hour ago evaporated instantly. The tears dried on my cheeks, replaced by a cold, calculated clarity that I had never felt before. The years of begging for their love, of hoping they would finally see my worth, vanished into the winter night. I picked up the heavy brass pen Grandpa Henry had carefully laid down right beside the documents. My hand did not shake anymore. I pressed the golden tip to the thick paper and signed my full name with very deliberate, forceful strokes. Grandpa Henry nodded approvingly and carefully gathered the highly sensitive legal documents, sliding them back into the brown craft envelope. "It is done," he said. "The firm is yours. The legal team will contact you at dawn to begin the formal transition. What you choose to do with the delinquent accounts is entirely up to your discretion as the new executive." I looked out the window of the VIP room at the snow falling softly over the Chicago streets. The family that had abandoned me thought they had won. They thought they had successfully discarded the weakest link to enjoy their stolen luxury. They had absolutely no idea that the balance of power had just shifted permanently. I stood up from the table, adjusting my coat, feeling a fierce new energy coursing through my veins. Legally, I now possessed the absolute financial power to completely dismantle their entire fraudulent existence forever. I looked at Grandpa Henry and smiled a genuine, dangerous smile. "I am going to visit them tomorrow morning to deliver my Christmas greetings." The morning of December 26th brought a bitter Chicago chill that seeped right through my coat, but the cold outside was nothing compared to the absolute ice in my veins. I stood in my heated garage, looking between the sleek midnight black Porsche Macan I had purchased for myself 2 months ago and the battered 2008 Honda Civic I kept explicitly for family visits. Today the choice was obvious. I grabbed the keys to the Civic. If my family wanted a pathetic, struggling event coordinator to mock, I would give them exactly what they expected. The element of surprise was the most powerful weapon I possessed, and I was not about to sacrifice it for a momentary flash of ego. The drive out to the North Shore took nearly an hour, giving me plenty of time to process the explosive documents my grandfather had handed me the night before. With every mile that passed, the reality of the situation settled deeper into my bones. DeAndre, the golden son-in-law, was drowning in subprime debt. My parents, blinded by their obsession with high society, had collateralized their entire retirement to keep his sinking ship afloat. And I, the daughter they had routinely discarded and humiliated, was now the chief executive officer of Onyx Capital Partners. Legally, I was the sole entity holding the deed to the extravagant fantasy world they were currently living in. I turned into the exclusive gated community, the sputtering engine of my Civic drawing annoyed glances from a passing security patrol. I pulled up to the massive faux European estate DeAndre and Kenzie had just bought. The circular driveway was littered with the remnants of their lavish Christmas party. Empty champagne boxes, crushed velvet ribbons, and valet parking stubs were scattered across the frost-covered pavement. I parked my old Honda directly behind DeAndre's leased G-Wagon, feeling a strange surge of calm wash over me. I walked up the sweeping limestone steps and pressed the glowing doorbell. It took 3 rings before the heavy mahogany door finally swung open. DeAndre stood in the doorway wearing a ridiculous, overpriced silk smoking jacket. He held a half-empty mug of coffee, his eyes bloodshot from a night of heavy drinking and celebrating. When his gaze landed on me, the irritation on his face morphed into a sneer of absolute disgust. He looked me up and down, taking in my plain wool coat and scuffed boots. "Oh," he sighed, his voice dripping with condescension. "Did the florist finally arrive to clean up the trash?" I stood my ground, looking directly into his bloodshot eyes. "I thought I would drop by to see the new house," I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. DeAndre scoffed and physically blocked the entryway with his arm. "Look, Lily, we had a real crowd here last night. Actual investors. Important people. I do not have the time or the patience to deal with your guilt trips about missing dinner." He gestured vaguely toward the side of the house. "Do me a favor and use the back door. The Italian marble floors in the foyer were just polished, and you are tracking snow everywhere." Before I could formulate a response to his breathtaking arrogance, the sound of sharp heels echoed from the grand staircase. My mother, Catherine, hurried into the entryway. She was already fully dressed in cashmere and pearls, looking exactly like the wealthy matriarch she desperately pretended to be. I braced myself for a moment, thinking that perhaps, just perhaps, seeing me standing in the freezing cold after completely abandoning me on Christmas Eve might trigger a single ounce of maternal guilt. I was wrong. Catherine did not greet me. She did not offer a hug. She did not even utter a simple apology for leaving me alone at the restaurant. Instead, she marched right past DeAndre, grabbed a heavy, foul-smelling black contractor trash bag from a pile near the coat closet, and shoved it aggressively against my chest. I reflexively brought my arms up to catch it, the smell of stale beer and discarded seafood instantly assaulting my senses. "Since you are here, make yourself useful," Catherine ordered, not even bothering to look me in the eye. "DeAndre has VIP investors coming over for a brunch meeting in 2 hours. The catering staff left a disaster on the back patio. Do not embarrass us by mingling or making small talk with anyone who walks through those doors. Just clean the patio, take the trash to the curb, and leave." The sheer audacity of her command hung in the freezing air. My own mother, the woman who had drained my college savings account to fund my sister's vanity projects, was now explicitly ordering me to act as their unpaid maid. She was treating the CEO of the private equity firm that literally owned her retirement fund like a discarded servant. I looked down at the garbage bag in my hands, then looked up at the towering crystal chandelier hanging above their heads. The irony was almost suffocating. They were standing in a house I technically controlled, demanding I scrub their floors. I did not yell. I did not throw the trash bag back in her face. I did not scream about the documents sitting in my glove compartment. I simply smiled a cold, empty smile that neither of them had the emotional intelligence to interpret. "Sure, Mom," I said softly. "I will take care of the mess." DeAndre rolled his eyes and turned away, muttering something about pathetic underachievers, while Catherine immediately started barking orders at an invisible housekeeper down the hall. I walked around the side of the massive property, carrying the heavy trash bag, my boots crunching against the frozen grass. I navigated toward the rear of the estate, stepping onto the sprawling, multi-tiered stone patio that overlooked a frozen lake. The patio was indeed a disaster, littered with half-eaten catering plates and shattered glass. But as I approached the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that separated the patio from DeAndre's private home office, I stopped dead in my tracks. I stepped out of the direct line of sight and peered through the expensive tinted glass. Inside the office, the arrogant, untouchable facade was completely gone. Kenzie and DeAndre were standing over a large mahogany desk. They were not drinking champagne or laughing about their wealth. They were huddled together, aggressively whispering, their faces pale and drawn tight with absolute panic. DeAndre's hands were shaking violently as he pointed to a massive stack of legal papers spread across the desk. Even through the thick glass, I could clearly see the bright red stamp of default notices and the bold headers of past due bank statements. Kenzie was biting her nails, looking at her husband with an expression of sheer terror. The illusion was cracking. The panic was finally setting in. I slowly lowered the trash bag to the frozen stone floor, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. The financial slaughter had already begun. I turned away from the glass office window, the bitter winter air biting at my cheeks. Before I could even take a step back toward the patio doors, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. It was my father, Richard. His grip was tight, bordering on painful, as he physically spun me around. Without a single word of greeting, he grabbed my upper arm and practically dragged me through the heavy oak side doors, pulling me straight into the massive catering kitchen. The space was a chaotic whirlwind of hired chefs and servers, rushing around with silver trays of caviar and roasted duck, but Richard did not care about the audience. He shoved me toward the far marble island, isolating us from the catering staff, who quickly averted their eyes. Catherine was already standing there, her arms crossed tightly over her pristine white cashmere sweater. Her face was set in that familiar rigid scowl she reserved exclusively for me. Richard reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick folded legal document. He slammed it down onto the marble countertop with a sharp smack that echoed loudly over the clatter of pots and pans. "Look at it," Richard demanded, his voice a harsh, impatient whisper. I glanced down at this paper. Across the top, printed in bold black letters, read the words, "Quitclaim Deed." I recognized the property address immediately. It was the deed to the 50 acres of prime commercial real estate in the suburbs, the ancestral land my grandparents had placed in a trust. It was meant to be divided equally among their grandchildren when the time was right. It was the very last safety net our family possessed, a plot of land worth millions completely untouched by debt. Richard tapped his manicured finger aggressively against the signature line at the bottom of the page. "You are going to sign this right now," he ordered. DeAndre is expanding his venture capital firm, and he needs to leverage this land for an emergency business loan to secure his next massive funding round. It is a temporary measure, and it is going to make this family richer than we ever dreamed. I looked from the paper to my father, keeping my expression perfectly blank. "You are asking me to sign away my legal rights to my only inheritance so your son-in-law can use it as collateral for his business." "He is not just my son-in-law," Catherine hissed, stepping closer so I could smell her expensive floral perfume masking the venom in her words. "He is the primary provider for this family. He is elevating our social status in Chicago. Meanwhile, you are 34, single and floating through life with no real career. Your sister is building an empire. She is a recognized luxury lifestyle influencer. She has a brand. What do you have? You coordinate cheap little parties for nobodies. Be a good older sister for once in your miserable life and sign it over." The blatant disrespect was staggering. They were asking me to forfeit my entire future to fund the fraudulent lifestyle of a man who openly mocked me. 10 years ago, when they stole my college fund to pay for Kenzie's extravagant wedding and fake business, I had cried. I had begged them to see my potential. Today, feeling the solid weight of the Onyx Capital transfer documents resting securely in my coat pocket, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, predatory thrill. I picked up the document, pretending to read through the dense legal jargon. I knew exactly what this quitclaim deed meant. DeAndre was desperate. The subprime loan he had taken out for this very mansion was suffocating him, and Onyx Capital was already squeezing his accounts. He needed a massive influx of capital to pay off his immediate debts, and he was using my family's ancestral land to secure a cross-collateralized loan. "Are you entirely sure DeAndre's investments are safe?" I asked, keeping my voice soft, almost conversational. I set the paper back down on the cold marble counter. "You already co-signed the mortgage for this house, Mom. If he defaults on his current portfolio, you lose your retirement home. If I sign this and he defaults again, you lose the ancestral land too. You lose absolutely everything." Catherine's face flushed a deep, ugly red. She slammed her hand flat against the marble table, startling a nearby pastry chef, who quickly dropped his gaze. How dare you speak about his business that way? Catherine spat, her voice trembling with raw, unhinged fury. You are just jealous. You have always been a bitter, jealous failure who cannot stand to see Kenzie succeed. DeAndre manages tens of millions of dollars. He dines with state senators. He is a financial genius. You know absolutely nothing about corporate finance or how real wealth works. If you do not sign that paper today, Richard leaned in close, his face inches from mine, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and cigars. You are permanently disowned. You will not be welcome at Christmas, you will not be welcome at Thanksgiving, and you will not see a single dime when your mother and I pass away. We will cut you out of this family like a tumor. Sign the paper, Lily. They were threatening me with the very isolation they had already subjected me to my entire life. They thought the threat of losing them would break me. They thought I was still that desperate 22-year-old girl begging for her mother's affection. I looked at my father's red, angry face. I looked at my mother's hateful, resentful eyes. I thought about Kenzie and DeAndre in the next room panicking over their crumbling house of cards, blissfully unaware that the executioner was standing right in their kitchen. I reached into my purse and pulled out a sleek silver pen. I did not argue. I did not shed a single tear. I just smiled. It was a chilling, dead-eyed smile that reached all the way to my core. I leaned over the cold marble island, pressed the pen to the paper, and signed my name with sharp, deliberate strokes. I relinquished my rights to the land completely and entirely. I slid the document back across the counter. Richard snatched it up instantly, a triumphant, mocking sneer spreading across his face. See, Catherine said, rolling her eyes as she crossed her arms again. Was that so hard? Now take the trash out to the curb like I asked you to, and leave through the service gate. We are done here. I turned on my heel and walked out the back door into the freezing winter air, my boots crunching on the icy pavement. My family sneered at my weakness, convinced they had just bullied me into submission. They thought they had won. They thought they had secured their golden child's future at my expense. They had absolutely no idea what they had just done. By leveraging that specific plot of ancestral land to cover his failing venture capital debts, DeAndre had to submit it to his primary creditor, Onyx Capital Partners, my firm. By forcing me to sign that quitclaim deed, my parents had legally tied every last remaining cent of their net worth directly to DeAndre's toxic portfolio. And I owned that portfolio. I had not just signed a piece of paper. I had just handed them the rope they needed to hang themselves, and I was going to deeply enjoy pulling the lever. 2 weeks had passed since the bitter morning. I stood in my parents' kitchen, smiled a chilling, dead-eyed smile, and signed away my ancestral inheritance without another word. My family had sneered at my perceived weakness, completely unaware that by leveraging that land, DeAndre had legally tied his entire failing portfolio to Onyx Capital. I had handed them the rope, and now I simply had to wait for them to hang themselves. It was the second week of January, and the financial bleeding surrounding my brother-in-law had only accelerated. Onyx Capital Partners. My firm had quietly tightened the screws on his subprime loans. DeAndre was suffocating under the weight of his own fraudulent empire, desperate for a massive, immediate influx of cash. His brilliant solution to this crisis was to host a spectacular New Year kickoff investor gala. He intended to pack a rented ballroom with tech founders and real estate moguls, blinding them with an illusion of immense wealth so they would blindly hand over their money. The only flaw in his grand strategy was that grand illusions require liquid cash, and DeAndre had absolutely none left. That was exactly why Kenzie summoned me to an upscale artisanal coffee shop in downtown Chicago. She did not ask if I was available. She sent a text with a location and a time, expecting me to drop whatever pathetic freelance work she assumed I was doing to cater to her needs. I arrived 10 minutes early, wearing a plain beige trench coat and scuffed boots to perfectly maintain my struggling underdog disguise. Kenzie swept through the glass doors 20 minutes late. She was draped in a floor-length faux fur coat and wore oversized designer sunglasses that she refused to take off indoors. She barked her complex order at a terrified barista did not offer to pay for my plain black coffee, and dropped her heavy designer handbag directly onto the center of our small table. She did not bother with basic pleasantries. She leaned forward, pushing her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose to glare at me. DeAndre is hosting his annual investor gala next Friday, she announced, speaking as if she were granting me an audience with royalty. It is going to be the biggest networking event of the season. We have billionaires flying in from the coast. We need the venue to be absolutely flawless. I sat perfectly still, letting the silence stretch between us. I watched her perfectly manicured fingers tap anxiously against her coffee cup. The desperation radiating off her was palpable, though she tried desperately to hide it behind a mask of sheer arrogance. And she continued waving her hand impatiently. Since you have those little freelance event connections, we have decided to let you coordinate the logistics. We need a 5-star catering team, a 12-piece string quartet, and premium imported floral arrangements. White orchids only. DeAndre also expects customized VIP gift bags for the top-tier investors, containing high-end tech gadgets and vintage champagne. You are going to handle the setup, manage the staff, and make sure DeAndre looks like a king. I kept my expression entirely neutral. What is the working budget for the evening, I asked. Kenzie threw her heads back and laughed out loud. It was a sharp grating sound that drew annoyed stares from a group of students at a neighboring table. Budget, she mocked, shaking her head in disbelief. Lily, we are giving you the opportunity of a lifetime. You get to put your tiny business name on a billionaire event. You will get exposure to people who actually matter. Consider your free labor as your rent for breathing the same air as our family. DeAndre is doing you a massive favor by letting you step foot in the same room as his network. You should be thanking us. I looked down at the table, biting the inside of my cheek to hide a dangerous surge of amusement. They were completely broke. They were trying to throw $1 million party using my labor because they could not afford to hire a real event management firm. I channeled every ounce of the weak, intimidated sister she expected to see. I hunched my shoulders slightly and broke eye contact. Catering and luxury florals for an event that size require massive upfront deposits, I said, keeping my voice small and hesitant. Vendors will not work for exposure, Kenzie. I can organize the logistics, but I cannot personally front the cash for your food and entertainment. Kenzie sighed dramatically, treating my practical concern like a toddler throwing a tantrum. Fine, she snapped, pulling out her phone. DeAndre will handle the vendor deposits directly from his corporate account. But you are running the entire show for free. No management fee, no complaining, you owe us this. I slowly looked back up at her. I can do that, I agreed softly. But I still need DeAndre to sign a standard vendor liability contract. It just protects me in case any of the hired staff damage the luxury venue or if someone gets hurt during the setup. It is just standard industry procedure for freelance coordinators. I reached into my worn canvas tote bag and pulled out a sleek black folder. I slid it across the table toward her. Kenzie barely glanced at the document. She flipped straight to the last page, completely ignoring the dense single-spaced paragraphs of legal text that filled the preceding pages. You and your cute little paperwork, she scoffed, rolling her eyes behind her dark lenses. You are always so obsessed with the rules. That is exactly why you are still poor. She shoved the folder carelessly into her oversized handbag. I will have DeAndre sign it tonight. But do not embarrass us, Lily. If this gala is anything less than perfection, Mom and Dad will make sure you are blacklisted from every event space in Chicago. I nodded submissively, murmuring a quiet thank you for the opportunity. Kenzie stood up, grabbed her specialized latte, and marched out of the coffee shop without a backward glance. 1 hour later, I stepped out of my private elevator and walked onto the top floor of the Onyx Capital Partners headquarters. The sleek, high-rise corporate office hummed with quiet, ruthless efficiency. Men and women in tailored suits nodded respectfully as I passed, stepping out of my way as I walked directly to my corner office. I did not sit behind my massive glass desk. Instead, I walked over to the leather seating area where Marcus, my lead corporate attorney, was waiting. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out the sleek black folder Kenzie had taken, and tossed it onto the glass coffee table. DeAndre's arrogant, sprawling signature was splashed across the bottom line. He must have signed it the second Kenzie got home, completely desperate to get the event moving. Marcus picked up the document, his sharp eyes scanning the signature. He signed it without legal review, Marcus asked, a predatory smirk playing on his lips. He thinks it is cute little paperwork from a freelance party planner, I replied, unbuttoning my coat. He has absolutely no idea what he just agreed to. Hidden deep within the fine print of that seemingly standard vendor agreement was a ruthless, ironclad personal guarantee clause crafted by the sharpest legal minds in Chicago. The contract explicitly stated that if the host of the event failed to secure his projected funding, or if any of his business entities defaulted on their operational debts within a 30-day window, the event coordinator possessed the immediate right to seize his personal assets to cover all perceived losses. By signing that paper, DeAndre had legally bypassed all of his corporate bankruptcy protections. He had tied his cars, his bank accounts, and his remaining personal wealth directly to the success of his desperate gala. If he failed to raise the millions he needed, Onyx Capital would not just take his business. I would personally take everything he owned. Exactly 48 hours after DeAndre signed that fatal vendor agreement, the receptionist on the top floor of Onyx Capital Partners buzzed my secure line. She informed me that a highly agitated man claiming to be a top-tier venture capitalist was demanding an immediate audience with the chief executive officer. I checked the lobby security feed on my monitor. There he was. DeAndre was pacing across the imported Italian marble floors, checking his gold Rolex every 10 seconds, his usual confident swagger replaced by a frantic, nervous energy. He was sweating. The walls were closing in on him, and he had come to the apex predator of the financial food chain to beg for a lifeline. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus, my lead vice president. "Go down to the lobby and greet our guest," I instructed, watching DeAndre badger the receptionist again. "But under no circumstances do you reveal my identity. Treat me like I am the lowest-ranking employee in this building." Marcus chuckled softly, a low, knowing sound. "Consider it done." I grabbed a stack of blank file folders from my desk to use as a prop and walked out of my corner office, timing my entrance perfectly. I stepped into the expansive sunlit lobby just as Marcus approached the reception desk. I kept my head down, shuffling the empty files, making myself look small and insignificant. I did not even have to look up to know DeAndre had spotted me. I heard his sharp, mocking laugh echo off the glass walls. "Wow, Lily, you really are desperate," DeAndre called out, his voice carrying the same cruel arrogance he used at family dinners. I stopped in my tracks and slowly looked up. DeAndre was standing in the center of the lobby, pointing at me, while looking around as if inviting the rest of the firm to join in his amusement. He straightened his expensive suit jacket, visibly puffing out his chest. Taking a temp job delivering coffee at a real financial firm, he sneered, shaking his head in mock pity. "Your mother told me you were struggling after paying for that pathetic little restaurant deposit, but I did not realize you had sunk to doing administrative grunt work. Did Kenzie sending you on those party errands not pay enough? You really need to stay out of my way today, Lily. I am here to meet the big boss. Real business is happening today." I bowed my head, letting my hair fall forward to hide the absolute thrill washing over my face. I bit my lip to keep from laughing out loud. He was standing in my headquarters, completely at my mercy, and he still thought he was the smartest man in the room. "Excuse me, Marcus," interrupted, stepping smoothly between us. His voice was sharp and commanding, carrying the exact tone of a high-level executive dealing with an incompetent intern. "Lily, was it? We do not pay you to stand around making small talk with our clients. Take those files to the basement storage and bring us fresh coffee in the main boardroom immediately. We have actual work to do." I nodded submissively, clutching the files to my chest. "Right away, sir." "I am so sorry," I mumbled, playing the role of the terrified subordinate flawlessly. DeAndre smirked at Marcus, clearly thrilled by my public dressing down. "Good luck with the temp staff," DeAndre joked, offering his hand to Marcus. "I am DeAndre Washington. I believe I have an appointment to discuss the restructuring of my subprime portfolio." Marcus shook his hand with a perfectly practiced cold corporate grip. "Follow me, Mr. Washington." We have a lot to discuss regarding your outstanding debt. I walked toward the elevators, keeping my head down until they disappeared down the executive hallway. Then I turned and walked straight into the private observation room that adjoined the main boardroom. The wall separating the two rooms was made of specialized one-way glass. From my side, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the massive mahogany conference table. From their side, it simply looked like a dark, opaque mirror. I stood in the darkness, watching DeAndre take a seat across from Marcus. The arrogance DeAndre had displayed in the lobby vanished the second the heavy boardroom doors clicked shut. He unbuttoned his jacket, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled a stack of heavily doctored financial projections from his briefcase. Through the hidden audio feed, I listened as DeAndre began to desperately pitch his failing business model. He talked in circles using buzzwords and inflated metrics, begging Onyx Capital for a 90-day extension on his crushing loan payments. He promised that his upcoming New Year gala would secure millions in new funding, guaranteeing that Onyx would be paid back in full. He was lying. His numbers were entirely fabricated, and thanks to the documents Grandpa Henry had given me, I knew exactly how deep his insolvency ran. I pulled out my phone and quickly typed a message to Marcus. My vice president felt his phone buzz on the table. He glanced down, reading my text without breaking his stoic expression. Deny the extension, I typed. Force him to cross-collateralize the loan with his incoming investor capital. Marcus gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod toward the mirrored wall. He closed DeAndre's financial portfolio and pushed it back across the table. Mr. Washington, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a lethal, uncompromising register. Your numbers do not justify an extension. You are bleeding cash. Your current assets are heavily over-leveraged, and your proposed gala is a speculative gamble. Onyx Capital does not deal in charity. We deal in guarantees. DeAndre panicked. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and he leaned forward, practically pleading, "Please, you have to understand the market conditions. I just need a little more time. The investors at this gala are ready to write checks. I guarantee it." "Then put your money where your mouth is," Marcus countered smoothly. He pulled a newly printed addendum from his folder and slid it toward DeAndre. "We will grant the extension, but only if you sign this cross-collateralization agreement. This states that any and all incoming capital from your new investors belongs immediately to Onyx Capital until your debt is settled. If your gala fails, we liquidate your business entirely." I watched through the glass, my heart pounding with dark anticipation. DeAndre was staring at the document. He did not read the terms. He did not consult a lawyer. He was completely blinded by his own desperation and his pathological need to keep up the appearance of wealth. He picked up his pen and, with a sweaty, shaking hand, signed his name blindly at the bottom of the page. He had just handed me total control over every single dollar he manipulated out of his wealthy friends. The trap was set, the lock was engaged, and my family was about to lose absolutely everything. Later that evening, the bustling floors of Onyx Capital emptied out, leaving only the soft hum of the ventilation system and the sprawling, glittering expanse of the Chicago skyline visible through my floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus walked into my office without knocking, carrying the thick, leather-bound portfolio DeAndre had so eagerly signed. He set it gently on my desk, a grim expression masking his usual sharp demeanor. I thanked him, waited for the heavy glass door to click shut, and turned my full attention to the documents. For the next 3 hours, the world outside ceased to exist. I was no longer the discarded daughter or the bullied sister. I was in my element. As a distressed debt analyst, I had spent my entire career dissecting the financial carcasses of ruined companies, looking for hidden assets, buried liabilities, and the exact moment a business turned from failing to fraudulent. I opened DeAndre's portfolio and began tracing the money. It did not take long for the horrifying truth to reveal itself. DeAndre had presented himself to my firm as a brilliant venture capitalist managing a sophisticated, highly diversified portfolio of tech startups and real estate acquisitions. The reality was a spectacular, terrifying house of cards. I tracked the routing numbers, cross-referenced his corporate shell entities with our internal database, and watched the cash flow patterns emerge. DeAndre was not investing a single dime. He was running a textbook Ponzi scheme. Every time he hosted a lavish networking event or secured a new round of funding, he funneled that fresh capital directly into the accounts of his oldest investors, disguising the desperate payouts as massive quarterly dividends. The new investors thought they were buying into the next major tech unicorn, while the old investors were blissfully unaware that their returns were just stolen cash from the latest victims. He had been doing this for years, completely reliant on the continuous accelerating influx of new money to keep the entire fraudulent structure from collapsing. His upcoming New Year gala was not an expansion strategy. It was a life support mechanism. If he did not secure a massive injection of cash next Friday, the payouts would stop, the investors would panic, and the scheme would detonate. But the horror of his financial crimes paled in comparison to what I found buried in the collateral schedules. Onyx Capital required hard assets to back any loan extension. DeAndre had submitted a staggering list of commercial real estate deeds and high-yield credit lines to pad his personal net worth. I sifted through the notarized pages, my blood running cold as I recognized the names attached as primary guarantors: Richard and Catherine, my parents. DeAndre had not just leveraged the ancestral land I signed over. He had secretly opened massive high-interest corporate credit lines in their names. I stared at the signature loops on the pages. The handwriting was close and incredibly practiced imitation, but I knew my father's sharp, aggressive signature and my mother's sweeping cursive better than anyone. DeAndre had forged their names. He had legally bound every remaining cent of their retirement, their primary residence, and their personal savings to his criminal enterprise. I sat back in my leather chair, the silence of the office pressing in on me. I had wanted them to lose their wealth. I had wanted them to experience the same humiliation and helplessness they had inflicted on me for my entire life. But this was entirely different. This was not a simple bankruptcy. This was federal fraud. When the Securities and Exchange Commission inevitably dismantled DeAndre's Ponzi scheme, they would follow the paper trail straight to my parents. Because their names were listed as co-guarantors on the fraudulent accounts, Richard and Catherine would be investigated as willing co-conspirators. They were facing total financial ruin and the very real threat of federal prison time, all because of their blind worship of their golden son-in-law. I reached for my cell phone, a heavy, suffocating knot of moral conflict tightening in my chest. They had abused me, belittled me, and stolen my future to fund Kenzie's fake lifestyle. But they were still my parents. The thought of them being dragged out of their suburban mansion in handcuffs made me physically sick. I had to give them one final chance, one opportunity to realize they were being played before the trap snapped shut completely. I dialed my mother's private number. It rang 4 times before she picked up the background noise of clinking wine glasses and Kenzie's shrill laughter filtering through the speaker. "What is it, Lily?" Catherine snapped, not bothering with a greeting. "I am in the middle of a fitting with Kenzie for the gala. Make it quick." I closed my eyes, taking a slow, shaky breath. "Mom, do you know what documents DeAndre has been making you sign?" I asked, keeping my voice as calm and steady as possible. There was a sharp, sudden silence on the other end of the line. The background noise vanished as Catherine stepped into another room. When she spoke again, her voice was a venomous, furious hiss. "How dare you?" Catherine snarled. "I knew you would do this. I told your father the second Kenzie gave you that event coordination job, you would try to find a way to ruin it. You are so consumed by your own pathetic jealousy that you cannot stand to see your sister married to a successful, brilliant man. DeAndre manages our wealth because he actually understands finance, unlike you who plays party planner for scraps." "Mom, please listen to me," I pleaded, gripping the edge of my desk. "He is not who you think he is. You are in serious danger. The only danger to this family is your toxic, bitter attitude," she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly in my quiet office. "You have always been a jealous saboteur. You want us to fail so you can feel better about your own miserable, lonely life. Do not ever speak to me about DeAndre's business again. Do your little job at the gala, stay in the shadows where you belong, and keep your mouth shut. You are a jealous failure, Lily, and if you try to ruin this night, you are dead to me. The line went dead with a harsh electronic beep. I slowly lowered the phone, staring at the darkened screen. The knot of anxiety in my chest unraveled, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness that quickly hardened into absolute clarity. I had tried. I had reached out to save them from a burning building, and they had slapped my hand away to worship the arsonist. Any lingering guilt, any shred of daughterly duty I had been clinging to, vanished into thin air. They had made their choice. They had chosen their golden boy, and they had chosen their own destruction. I stood up, walked out of my office, and headed straight into the adjacent conference room, where Marcus and my elite team of corporate litigators were waiting for my final directive. They looked up as I entered, reading the shift in my posture, the predatory calm settling over my features. "Prepare the foreclosure notices and contact the SEC," I ordered, my voice ringing with lethal authority. We dropped the hammer at the gala. Marcus did not hesitate. He gave a single sharp nod and immediately began barking orders to the junior partners. The conference room transformed into a war room. Analysts pulled the remaining threads of DeAndre's fraudulent accounts, drafting the foreclosure notices with surgical precision. I stood by the glass window, looking out over the city, feeling a profound sense of finality. The lingering hope that my family might somehow see reason, that they might recognize my worth before the end, was completely gone. I had offered them a life raft, and they had chosen to drown. I would not offer another. The morning before the gala arrived with a frantic, buzzing energy that seemed to infect the entire city. My phone rang incessantly, with updates from the event staff I had hired. The florists were arranging thousands of white orchids. The string quartet was doing their final sound check. The catering team was prepping a menu that DeAndre could not actually afford. Amidst the barrage of logistical updates, my personal cell phone vibrated. The caller ID flashed with my mother's name. I answered, keeping my voice perfectly flat. "Listen to me very carefully," Catherine snapped, skipping any form of greeting. "The venue is looking acceptable, which is the bare minimum I expect from you. But we need to establish some ground rules for tomorrow night. I just sent a courier to your apartment with a package. You are to wear exactly what is inside it." I glanced at the brown cardboard box sitting on my kitchen counter. It had arrived 10 minutes ago. "What is it?" I asked. "It is a standard catering uniform," Catherine said, her voice dripping with absolute disdain. "You better not show your face in the main ballroom tomorrow night. You will enter through the service elevator, and you will stay in the kitchen with the rest of the hired help. DeAndre has extremely important high society guests flying in from New York and Silicon Valley. These are billionaires, Lily. Your cheap clothes and your awkward, pathetic energy will completely ruin the aesthetic of the evening. If there is an emergency, you send a busboy to find Kenzie. Do not approach us, do not speak to the investors, and do not tell anyone you are related to us. Do you understand?" I stared at the cardboard box, marveling at the sheer depth of her cruelty. She was treating the woman who held the deed to her entire financial future like a stray dog. "I understand perfectly, Mom," I replied softly. "I will be exactly where I belong tomorrow night." Catherine scoffed. "See that you are. Do not embarrass us." The line clicked dead. I tossed the phone onto the counter and opened a social media app. It took less than 3 seconds to find exactly what I was looking for. Kenzie was broadcasting a live video from the back seat of a chauffeured town car. She was wearing a designer silk dress, but the absolute centerpiece of the video was the massive, blindingly bright diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. "Look what my amazing husband just surprised me with!" Kenzie squealed to her thousands of followers, tilting her neck so the diamonds caught the light. $100,000 of pure perfection. DeAndre always treats me like a queen. Tomorrow night is our massive investor gala, and let me tell you all a little secret. We are about to become the absolute most powerful couple in Chicago finance. The deals we are closing tomorrow will change the city forever. Stay tuned, because the Blackwell Empire is just getting started. I watched the video loop, a cold, hard knot of disgust forming in my stomach. $100,000. She was flaunting a necklace purchased with stolen funds. DeAndre had literally robbed his previous investors, forged my parents' signatures on toxic credit lines, and used that fraudulent cash to buy his wife a shiny trinket to keep up their pathetic charade. Kenzie was drowning in a sea of federal crimes, blissfully bragging to the internet about an empire that did not actually exist. I turned away from the screen and headed straight to my downtown office. The time for observation was over. When I walked into my private boardroom, Marcus was already seated at the table. Sitting directly across from him was Grandpa Henry. My grandfather looked older than I remembered, his weathered face lined with a deep, profound sorrow, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He was the only person in my family who had ever seen my potential. He was the one who had quietly transferred the initial capital I needed to start Onyx, and he was the one who had secretly slipped me the documents exposing DeAndre's massive Ponzi scheme months ago. "Is it done?" Grandpa Henry asked, his voice rough, as I took my seat at the head of the table. I looked at Marcus, who slid a thick stack of finalized legal documents toward me. "Everything is airtight," Marcus confirmed. "We have the cross-collateralization agreement signed by DeAndre. We have the evidence of the forged signatures tying Richard and Catherine to the fraudulent accounts. We have the complete money trail proving the venture capital firm is a Ponzi scheme. The foreclosure notices are printed and ready to be served." I picked up the heavy pen resting on the desk. "What about the authorities?" I asked. "The encrypted file was sent directly to my contacts at the Securities and Exchange Commission 30 minutes ago." Marcus replied, a ruthless gleam in his eye. "The SEC Fraud Division has already reviewed the preliminary data. They are accelerating their response based on the severity of the financial crimes and the flight risk posed by DeAndre. Federal agents will be waiting in the wings tomorrow night." I looked at Grandpa Henry. He placed his calloused hand over mine. "They made their choices." "Lily," he said quietly, a heartbreaking finality in his tone. "They stole from you, they mocked you, and they tied their ship to a criminal. You cannot save people who are determined to sink. Drop the hammer." I nodded, the last ounce of hesitation evaporating from my blood. I signed my name on the final execution orders, locking the trap securely into place. When I returned to my apartment late that evening, the brown cardboard box from my mother was still sitting exactly where I had left it. I picked up a pair of scissors, sliced through the packing tape, and pulled out the contents. It was a cheap, stiff polyester catering uniform. Black slacks, a poorly fitted white button-down shirt, and a scratchy black vest. The kind of outfit designed to make the wearer invisible. It smelled of industrial starch and humiliation. I walked into my living room and flipped the switch to ignite the gas fireplace. The flames roared to life, casting dancing shadows across the hardwood floor. I looked at the uniform in my hands, thinking about every time Catherine had told me I was not good enough. I thought about Kenzie's diamond necklace and DeAndre's mocking laugh in my corporate lobby. I tossed the uniform directly into the flames. I stood there for several minutes watching the cheap polyester melt and shrivel, the acrid black smoke venting up the chimney. They wanted me to be the help. They wanted me to hide in the shadows, so my presence would not offend their high society marks. I turned my back on the fire and walked into my master bedroom. I bypassed my everyday business wear and went straight to the back of my expansive walk-in closet. I reached up and unzipped a heavy, opaque garment bag. Inside hung a custom-made $25,000 haute couture gown. It was tailored from midnight black silk, structured and sharp, radiating absolute wealth, power, and unapologetic authority. It was a dress meant to command a room, a dress meant to intimidate. I ran my fingers over the luxurious fabric, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. I was not going to the gala as a freelance coordinator. I was not going as the invisible, disappointing daughter. I was going as the executioner, and I was going to make sure they saw me coming. Exactly 2 weeks later, the desperate financial bleeding surrounding my brother-in-law had only accelerated. Onyx Capital Partners had quietly initiated the early stages of a liquidity squeeze on his subprime loans, and DeAndre was suffocating under the weight of his own fraudulent empire. He was desperate for a massive immediate influx of cash to satisfy his creditors and keep his house of cards standing. His brilliant solution to this crisis was to host a spectacular New Year investor gala. He intended to pack a rented downtown ballroom with tech founders and real estate moguls, blinding them with an illusion of immense wealth so they would blindly hand over their money to fund his sinking ship. The only flaw in his grand strategy was that grand illusions require liquid cash, and DeAndre had absolutely none left. He needed high-end event management, premium catering, and luxury entertainment, but his corporate accounts were entirely drained. That was exactly why Kenzie summoned me to an artisanal coffee shop in the Gold Coast district. She did not ask if I was available. She sent a text with a location and a time, fully expecting me to drop whatever pathetic freelance work she assumed I was doing to cater to her immediate needs. I arrived 10 minutes early, wearing a plain beige trench coat and scuffed boots to perfectly maintain my struggling underdog disguise. Kenzie swept through the glass doors 20 minutes late. She was draped in a floor-length faux fur coat and wore oversized designer sunglasses that she refused to take off indoors. She barked her complex order at a terrified barista did not offer to pay for my plain black coffee, and dropped her heavy designer handbag directly onto the center of our small table. She did not bother with basic pleasantries. She leaned forward, pushing her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose to glare at me. DeAndre is hosting his massive New Year investor gala next Friday, she announced, speaking as if she were granting me an audience with royalty. It is going to be the biggest networking event of the season. We have billionaires flying in from the coast. We need the venue to be absolutely flawless. I sat perfectly still, letting the silence stretch between us. I watched her perfectly manicured fingers tap anxiously against her coffee cup. The desperation radiating off her was palpable, though she tried desperately to hide it behind a mask of sheer arrogance. And she continued waving her hand impatiently. Since you have those little freelance event connections, we have decided to let you coordinate the logistics. We need a 5-star catering team, a 12-piece string quartet, and premium imported floral arrangements. White orchids only. DeAndre also expects customized VIP gift bags for the top-tier investors containing high-end tech gadgets and vintage champagne. You are going to handle the setup, manage the staff, and make sure DeAndre looks like an absolute king. I kept my expression entirely neutral. What is the working budget for the evening, I asked. Kenzie threw her head back and laughed out loud. It was a sharp grating sound that drew annoyed stares from a group of students at a neighboring table. Budget, she mocked, shaking her head in disbelief. Lily, we are giving you the opportunity of a lifetime. You get to put your tiny business name on a billionaire event. You will get exposure to people who actually matter in this city. Consider your free labor as your rent for breathing the same air as our family. DeAndre is doing you a massive favor by putting your tiny business name on his billionaire event. You should be thanking us on your knees. I looked down at the table, biting the inside of my cheek to hide a dangerous surge of amusement. They were completely broke. They were trying to throw $1 million party using my labor because they could not afford to hire a real event management firm. I channeled every ounce of the weak, intimidated sister she expected to see. I hunched my shoulders slightly and broke eye contact. Catering and luxury florals for an event that size require massive upfront deposits, I said, keeping my voice small and hesitant. Vendors will not work for exposure, Kenzie. I can organize the logistics, but I cannot personally front the cash for your food and entertainment. Kenzie sighed dramatically, treating my practical concern like a toddler throwing a tantrum. Fine, she snapped, pulling out her phone. DeAndre will handle the vendor deposits directly from his corporate account, but you are running the entire show for free. No management fee, no complaining. You owe us this. I slowly looked back up at her. I can do that, I agreed softly. But I still need DeAndre to sign a standard vendor liability contract. It just protects me in case any of the hired staff damage the luxury venue or if someone gets hurt during the setup. It is just standard industry procedure for freelance coordinators. I reached into my worn canvas tote bag and pulled out a sleek black folder. I slid it across the table toward her. Kenzie barely glanced at the document. She flipped straight to the last page, completely ignoring the dense single-spaced paragraphs of legal text that filled the preceding pages. "You and your cute little paperwork," she scoffed, rolling her eyes behind her dark lenses. "You are always so obsessed with the rules. That is exactly why you are still poor." She shoved the folder carelessly into her oversized handbag. "I will have DeAndre sign whatever cute little paperwork you need tonight. But do not embarrass us, Lily. If this gala is anything less than perfection, Mom and Dad will make sure you are blacklisted from every event space in Chicago." I nodded submissively, murmuring a quiet thank you for the opportunity. Kenzie stood up, grabbed her specialized latte, and marched out of the coffee shop without a backward glance. DeAndre's fingers clamped around my bare bicep like a vice. His face, usually a mask of smooth practiced charm, was contorted into an ugly, mottled sneer. The heavy scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the metallic tang of his sweat. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" He hissed, his voice a low, vibrating threat that barely contained his rage. "Did you steal a client's dress? I told Kenzie you were a liability. You need to get out of here right now before I have security throw you out onto the street." I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I simply looked down at his hand gripping my arm, then slowly, deliberately raised my eyes to meet his. The cold, absolute calm radiating from me seemed to confuse him for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to effortlessly twist my arm out of his grasp. "You do not touch me," I said, my voice dropping to a register so quiet and lethal that DeAndre actually took a half step back. Before he could recover his arrogance, Catherine descended upon us like a furious bird of prey. She shoved past two wealthy investors, her face flushed red with absolute indignation. She planted herself directly in front of me, pointing a manicured finger so close to my face I could feel the air move. "You ungrateful, vindictive wretch!" Catherine spat, abandoning any pretense of high society decorum. "We give you a simple job to keep you off the streets, and you use it to pull this pathetic stunt. You are deliberately trying to ruin your sister's night because you cannot stand to see her happy. Take off that stolen dress. Go out the back door and never speak to us again. You are completely dead to us." Kenzie appeared right behind her mother, clutching her heavy diamond necklace like a protective talisman. Her eyes darted around the foyer, hyper-aware of the growing crowd of investors who had stopped their conversations to watch the unfolding spectacle. "Mom, just call the police," Kenzie whined loudly, trying to reclaim control of the narrative. "She is clearly having some kind of mental breakdown. She is trespassing at a private corporate event." I looked at the three of them. The sister who stole my life, the mother who enabled it, and the fraudster who was about to bring it all crashing down. They were so desperate, so completely blinded by their own fragile illusions. Instead of cowering, instead of shrinking back into the shadows they had designed for me, I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. Instantly, the atmosphere in the foyer shifted. The subtle shadows near the grand entrance seemed to solidify as two massive, broad-shouldered men in immaculate black suits stepped forward. They moved with a terrifying synchronized efficiency. They bypassed the hotel's standard event security, stepping smoothly between me and my family. The guard on the right placed a massive hand flat against DeAndre's chest and physically shoved him backward. DeAndre stumbled, his expensive loafers skidding against the polished marble floor. "What are you doing?" he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "I am the host of this event. I am DeAndre Washington. You work for me." The guards did not blink. They did not speak. They simply stood like twin monoliths, creating an impenetrable wall of muscle and dark fabric between me and the people who thought they owned me. Kenzie's jaw dropped, her perfectly glossed lips parting in shock. "You cannot do this," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the guards. "My husband hired you. I will personally see to it that you are both sued for assault. I want the hotel manager out here immediately. Get the manager right now." She did not have to wait long. The heavy gold-plated doors of the main ballroom swung open, and Mr. Sterling, the general manager of the elite downtown hotel, hurried into the foyer. He was accompanied by the head of hotel security, both men looking tense and hyper-aware of the disruption. DeAndre saw him and immediately puffed out his chest, attempting to regain his shattered authority. Sterling DeAndre barked, straightening his suit jacket. Finally, I need you to have these two rogue guards fired immediately, and I want this woman. He pointed a shaking finger at me, escorted off the premises. She is trespassing and she is harassing my VIP guests. Mr. Sterling did not look at DeAndre. He did not look at Catherine or Kenzie. He walked straight past the furious venture capitalist, completely ignoring the demands echoing off the marble walls. He stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me, clasped his hands behind his back, and bowed respectfully. "Is everything to your liking tonight, Madam?" Mr. Sterling asked, his voice ringing clearly across the suddenly silent foyer. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes an avalanche. I watched the blood completely drain from DeAndre's face. Catherine's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Kenzie looked frantically between the hotel manager and me, her mind failing to process the reality unfolding in front of her. "Everything is perfectly fine, Mr. Sterling," I replied, my voice smooth and commanding. The Washington family was just leaving the foyer. They have an important announcement to attend to. Before DeAndre could formulate a response, before Catherine could launch another attack, the heavy, muffled sound of the event, MC's voice boomed over the main ballroom speakers, echoing clearly into the foyer. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, the deep resonance of the sound system cutting through the tension. "Please take your seats. We have a special announcement regarding the future of tonight's event, brought to you by the primary financial backer of Onyx Capital Partners." The echo of the master of ceremonies died down in the foyer. DeAndre immediately snapped his attention away from the hotel manager. The panic that had briefly flickered in his eyes when my security guards shoved him was instantly replaced by a blinding, euphoric arrogance. He smoothed the lapels of his custom tuxedo, his chest puffing out as he completely dismissed my presence. He actually believed the announcement was for him. He thought his ultimate salvation had arrived. "That is my cue." DeAndre smirked, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "The chief executive officer of Onyx Capital is here to announce my new funding round. Watch and learn what real success looks like, Lily. Maybe if you pay attention, you can fetch us our celebratory champagne afterward." He turned his back on me, completely ignoring the imposing security detail and the hotel manager who was still treating me with utmost reverence. He strutted toward the open doors of the main ballroom, acting as though he owned the very building we stood in, acting as though he was the undisputed king of Chicago finance. He was so completely insulated by his own narcissism that he could not even begin to process the reality shifting around him. Catherine and Richard hurried after him, eager to share in the reflected glory of their golden son-in-law. My mother shot me one final glare of absolute disgust over her shoulder, mouthing the words, "Stay out." Kenzie practically sprinted to keep up with her husband, frantically tapping the screen of her phone to ensure her social media live stream was capturing every second of what she believed would be their ultimate triumph. I waited a beat, letting them get into position. I gave Mr. Sterling a polite nod of dismissal, signaled my guards to follow at a discreet distance, and stepped through the grand double doors into the ballroom. The venue was spectacular. It was a sea of white orchids, crystal chandeliers, and Chicago's financial elite. The city's wealthiest investors, tech moguls, and venture capitalists were seated at velvet-draped tables, sipping vintage champagne and waiting for the keynote address. DeAndre positioned himself right at the base of the stage stairs. He was practically vibrating with anticipation. He stood with his shoulders squared, offering confident, practiced nods to the billionaires seated nearby, fully projecting the image of a titan of industry about to receive his crown. On stage, the master of ceremonies adjusted his microphone. "Tonight is a celebration of vision." The MC began, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "We are gathered here to witness the intersection of ambition and capital. Onyx Capital Partners has long been a shadowy giant in the financial sector, known for their ruthless efficiency, their unparalleled market strategies, and their absolute refusal to back losing ventures. Tonight, the visionary behind that empire has chosen to step out of the shadows to address this room directly. DeAndre was nodding along enthusiastically, completely oblivious to the specific choice of words. He believed the praise of Onyx Capital was a prelude to his own glorification, an endorsement of his fake empire. He shifted his weight, raising his hand slightly, ready to ascend the stairs and shake hands with whoever stepped up to the podium. Kenzie stood a few feet away, her phone held high, recording her husband with a manic, triumphant grin. She was already practicing the poses she would strike when they were inevitably invited on stage to accept their massive check. The master of ceremonies raised his voice, reading directly from the cue card my lead vice president Marcus had handed him 5 minutes ago. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the founder and chief executive officer of Onyx Capital Partners, Ms. Gwendolyn Lilly. The name ripped through the ballroom. For a fraction of a second, total confusion washed over the Washington and Blackwell families. DeAndre frowned, his outstretched hand freezing in midair. Catherine and Richard exchanged bewildered glances. They knew my full legal name was Gwendolyn Lilly, but their brains simply refused to connect the billionaire CEO of a ruthless financial empire with the daughter they had treated like disposable garbage. High above the ballroom floor, the lead lighting technician executed my precise instructions. The massive, brilliant white spotlight swung violently away from the empty stage wings. The beam of light sliced through the darkness, sweeping over the tables of wealthy investors, bypassing DeAndre completely and landing directly on the back aisle. It perfectly centered on me in my haute couture gown. The entire ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. Hundreds of powerful investors stood up, turning toward the back of the room to clap for the woman who controlled their markets. The light caught every intricate bead and fold of my custom dress, making the authentic diamonds at my throat blaze with blinding intensity. I stood at the edge of the crowd, radiating absolute, undisputed authority. The absolute horror that crashed over my family was a masterpiece of human reaction. DeAndre looked as though the floor had suddenly dropped out from beneath him. He stood paralyzed at the base of the stairs, his eyes bulging out of his skull, his skin turning an ashen, sickly gray. His jaw hung open in a silent scream of realization. The puzzle pieces of the last 48 hours slammed together in his mind. The mysterious CEO who refused to meet him, the lethal cross-collateralization agreement he had blindly signed, the fact that he had handed over legal control of every single dollar he owned to the very woman he had mocked in a corporate lobby just hours ago. Kenzie's fake triumphant smile shattered into a million pieces. The shock was so violent, so physically jarring that all the strength left her hands. Her expensive smartphone slipped through her fingers, plummeting to the marble floor with a sharp, sickening crack. The screen shattered exactly like her pathetic illusions of grandeur. Catherine and Richard stood frozen at their VIP table. Their champagne glasses hovered midair, their hands shaking so violently that the expensive liquid sloshed over the rims and stained the white tablecloth. They looked like they had just seen a ghost. The daughter they had mocked, starved of affection, pushed into the shadows, and legally bound to a fraudulent Ponzi scheme, was the apex predator they had just begged for a lifeline. The realization that they had actively participated in their own destruction was written plainly across their aging faces. The wealthy investors surrounding them began to murmur and whisper, pointing at the stunning woman commanding the spotlight. DeAndre's carefully constructed high society marks were eagerly applauding my arrival, completely ignoring the sweaty, panicked fraudster standing by the stairs. DeAndre's brain finally restarted, flooded with a toxic mix of terror and rage. He realized his entire scheme, his entire life was entirely in my hands. He abandoned his position by the stairs and stormed toward me as I began my walk down the center aisle. His face was flushed a dark, dangerous red. He completely forgot the audience, forgot the investors, and forgot the cameras. He intercepted me halfway to the stage, lunging forward and grabbing my bare arm violently. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" he hissed, his voice a frantic, desperate whisper, meant only for me. "Did you steal a client's dress? Get out of here before I have security throw you onto the street." I did not break my stride. I casually flicked my wrist, breaking his weak, sweaty grip with effortless disdain. My security detail stepped up behind him, a silent, looming threat that kept him locked in place. I turned my head, locking my eyes onto his terrified, trembling face. I offered him a chilling, razor-sharp smile that promised nothing but total financial and personal annihilation. I glided past my paralyzed brother-in-law, the heavy silk of my gown brushing against his frozen legs. I ascended the carpeted stairs with perfect poise, walked directly to the podium, and took the microphone from the master of ceremonies. The applause died down, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. I looked out over the sea of wealthy investors, my gaze finally settling on the terrified, ruined faces of my family in the front row. "Good evening," I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling and ringing with absolute clarity through the state-of-the-art sound system. Tonight was supposed to be about future investments. It was marketed to you all as an exclusive opportunity to back a visionary mind and join a financial dynasty. But as the founder and chief executive officer of Onyx Capital, the firm that currently holds 100% of DeAndre Washington's corporate debt, I believe in total transparency. The silence in the room was absolute and suffocating. I could see the confusion rippling through the wealthy elite seated at the velvet-draped tables. They shifted in their expensive seats, exchanging uncertain, guarded glances. Down in the front row, DeAndre looked like a man standing on a gallows trapdoor. Catherine and Richard were frozen in place, their faces drained of all color, finally comprehending that the daughter they had banished to the catering kitchen was holding the executioner's axe. Kenzie was shaking her head violently, muttering frantic denials to herself, entirely unable to process the total destruction of her fabricated reality. I did not give them a single moment to recover. I raised my left hand and snapped my fingers sharply into the microphone. Instantly, the massive digital screens flanking the stage, which were supposed to showcase DeAndre's glossy, highly fabricated pitch deck, went completely black. A fraction of a second later, they flared back to life with a blinding, unforgiving white light. Instead of colorful graphs and inflated revenue projections, the screens displayed stark, undeniable legal reality. Gigantic high-resolution images of DeAndre's actual bank statements flashed across the displays. Every single document was heavily redacted to protect the innocent victims, but the glaring, bright red highlights circling his zero balances and massive overdrafts were unmistakable. Default notices from top-tier banks scrolled past in rapid succession. Urgent collection letters from secondary lenders filled the glowing screens, and then the final lethal blow materialized. Copies of immediate foreclosure documents bearing the official seal of Onyx Capital Partners illuminated the entire ballroom. Loud gasps echoed across the room as seasoned investors adjusted their glasses, leaning forward to read the damning financial literature. These were men and women who understood money better than anyone, and what they were looking at was a complete financial bloodbath. DeAndre Washington has not generated a single cent of legitimate profit in over 3 years. I narrated, my voice cutting through the rising murmur of the crowd like a sharpened blade. He is not a brilliant venture capitalist. He is running a highly leveraged, utterly fraudulent Ponzi scheme. Every investment pitch you heard tonight was nothing more than a desperate attempt to secure fresh capital to pay off the people he robbed last month. Angry shouts of indignation erupted from the back tables. A prominent tech billionaire who had been photographed shaking DeAndre's hand just an hour ago slammed his fist onto the white linen tablecloth, his face purple with unbridled outrage. But the deception goes much deeper than corporate fraud. I continued pacing slowly across the stage and turning my gaze directly down to my mother and father. You see, an illusion of this magnitude requires a very expensive stage. That spectacular mansion where DeAndre and Kenzie hosted their opulent Christmas party, the property they used to convince you all of their immense untouchable wealth. It was not purchased with the proceeds of a successful tech startup. It was acquired using a highly toxic subprime loan. I paused, making sure every single person in the room was hanging on my next word. I looked right into my father's wide, terrified eyes, and because DeAndre had absolutely no liquid capital or credit left to his name, that subprime loan was co-signed by his trusting, eager in-laws, my parents Richard and Catherine. The screens shifted again, displaying the ironclad cross-collateralization agreements and the forged signatures tying my parents directly to DeAndre's sinking ship. Every dollar of their retirement fund, The equity in their suburban home and their lifelong personal savings are now legally tied to DeAndre's criminal enterprise, I announced, watching my mother physically collapse back into her chair. Her hands flew up to cover her face, as the magnitude of her total ruin finally registered. Because of their blind loyalty to a con artist, their entire financial existence has been completely wiped out. They are legally responsible for his debts. Onyx Capital will begin liquidating their remaining personal assets at exactly 9 o'clock on Monday morning. The ballroom absolutely exploded. The polite, refined atmosphere of the high society gala shattered into pure, unadulterated chaos. Dozens of wealthy investors jumped out of their seats, simultaneously shouting in outrage and demanding answers. Men in tailored suits were frantically dialing their legal teams, screaming panicked orders into their cell phones. Security personnel scrambled to maintain order as furious attendees began advancing toward the front row, demanding their deposits back. DeAndre finally snapped out of his paralyzed stupor. The reality of angry investors in federal prison looming over him triggered his ultimate fight-or-flight response. He spun around, completely abandoning his sobbing wife and ruined in-laws, and made a desperate, cowardly sprint toward the main exit doors at the back of the ballroom. He shoved a terrified waiter out of the way, his eyes locked on the illuminated red exit sign. He did not even make it halfway down the center aisle. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut with a resounding final thud. My elite personal security team stepped out from the shadows, instantly blocking the only viable escape route. They crossed their massive arms, staring DeAndre down with cold, merciless intent. DeAndre slammed on the brakes, turning around in frantic circles like a trapped rat, completely surrounded by a mob of furious investors and a barricaded exit. From the front row, Kenzie finally broke. The reality of losing her fake wealth, her stolen status, and her entire future crashed down on her fragile ego all at once. She dropped to her knees right there on the champagne-soaked carpet, clutching her perfectly styled hair and screaming hysterically, the shrill broken sound piercing right through the chaos of the ruined gala. The night of the New Year Investor Gala arrived, bringing with it a bitter winter wind that howled off Lake Michigan. Inside the grand foyer of the Sterling Hotel, however, the air was suffocatingly warm. It was thick with the scent of vintage champagne. It was thick with the heavy perfume of desperate billionaires. It was thick with the palpable, sweaty anxiety of my brother-in-law. I stepped out of my private black town car and handed my wool coat to the terrified valet. I was no longer the weak, struggling underdog hiding inside a plain beige trench coat. Tonight I was draped in a custom emerald silk gown that hugged every curve of my body, paired with authentic heavy diamond earrings that caught the blinding light of the massive crystal chandeliers above. I walked into the grand foyer, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. Clicking sharply against the floor. Clicking sharply against the raw, frayed nerves of the man who thought he owned me. DeAndre spotted me almost immediately. He was standing near the entrance to the main ballroom, desperately trying to charm a group of skeptical Silicon Valley executives. The very moment his eyes landed on my emerald gown, the fake practiced smile melted off his face. It was replaced by a flush of absolute, unadulterated fury. He excused himself abruptly, leaving the executives mid-sentence, and marched directly toward me. His heavy footsteps echoed his rising panic. He saw a threat. He saw a liability. He saw the poor, pathetic sister who was supposed to be sweating in the catering kitchen, not mingling in the billionaire's foyer. He closed the distance between us in seconds, reaching out with a meaty hand and clamping his fingers ruthlessly around my bare arm. His grip was tight, punishing, specifically meant to intimidate and control. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" he hissed, his breath hot and reeking of expensive scotch. "I told you to stay out of sight. You are a coordinator, not a guest. Get back to the service corridors before I have you physically thrown out onto the street." He expected me to shrink. He expected me to drop my gaze, to apologize, to scurry back into the shadows where he believed I permanently belonged. But the shadows were gone. The shadows were entirely gone. I looked down at his hand gripping my flesh, then slowly back up to his eyes. My expression was perfectly blank. I did not flinch. I did not apologize. Instead, I effortlessly twisted my arm using a sharp, precise angle that broke his grip instantly. He stumbled slightly, genuinely shocked by the sudden, immovable resistance. Before he could recover his arrogant posture, the sharp, frantic clicking of stilettos announced my mother's arrival. Catherine rushed over, her face contorted into a mask of pure venom. She pushed past a waiter, nearly knocking a silver tray of caviar to the floor, her eyes locked entirely on my expensive dress. "You ungrateful wretch!" Catherine spat, her voice an ugly, ragged whisper meant to avoid drawing a crowd, though her raw anger was practically vibrating in the air. "What is wrong with you? You are deliberately trying to ruin your sister's night. You cannot stand to see Kenzie succeed. You cannot stand to see her happy. Where did you even get that gown? Did you steal it from one of your clients? Take off that stolen dress right now. Go out the back door and get out of our sight. You are a disgrace. You are a liability. You are dead to us." The words echoed in my mind over and over, but they brought no pain. They brought no tears. They brought only the cold, sharp clarity of absolute power. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had spent my entire life grinding my self-worth into dust, and I felt nothing but a distant clinical pity. I did not cower. I did not retreat. I stood perfectly still, letting their desperate, pathetic hatred wash over me. Then I slowly raised my right hand into the air. It was a simple gesture, a silent command. Instantly, the entire atmosphere in the foyer fractured. The shadows near the grand stone columns seemed to separate and solidify. Two massive, impeccably suited security guards stepped forward. They were not the hotel's standard security detail. They were my personal detail men, trained to move with terrifying synchronized efficiency. They bypassed the murmuring crowd, bypassed the stunned waiters, and stepped directly between me and my furious family. The guard on the left placed a massive hand flat against DeAndre's chest and physically shoved him back. DeAndre stumbled hard, his expensive loafers skidding violently against the polished marble. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice cracking with sudden panic, abandoning his previous attempt to keep things quiet. "What are you doing? I am the host of this gala. I am DeAndre Washington. You cannot touch me." Kenzie, who had just rushed over from the coat check, let out a piercing, dramatic shriek. She threw her hands in the air, her face turning a blotchy, furious red. "Do not touch my husband!" she screamed at the guards, drawing the stares of every single investor in the grand foyer. "I will sue you. I will sue this entire hotel. DeAndre, make them arrest her." DeAndre frantically scanned the foyer, spotting the general manager of the hotel rushing toward the commotion. Sterling, DeAndre barked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Get these rogue guards out of here immediately. This woman is trespassing. She is harassing my VIP guests. I demand you kick her out of this hotel right now." Mr. Sterling, a dignified man in a crisp, tailored suit, approached our group. He did not look at DeAndre. He did not acknowledge Kenzie's hysterical shrieking. He walked straight past the frantic venture capitalist, treating him like an invisible, irrelevant nuisance. Mr. Sterling stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me. He clasped his hands behind his back and bowed deeply, respectfully, bending at the waist, in a display of absolute subservience. "Is everything to your liking tonight, madam?" Mr. Sterling asked, his voice ringing clearly and politely across the suddenly silent marble foyer. The silence that crashed down on my family was absolute. It was suffocating. DeAndre's mouth hung open, his arrogant command dying permanently in his throat. Catherine stared at the hotel manager, her eyes wide with total incomprehension. Kenzie's hands dropped to her sides, her brain entirely failing to process the reality unfolding in front of her. Why was the manager of the most elite hotel in Chicago treating the poor, struggling event planner like royalty? Why was he bowing? Why was he completely ignoring the billionaire host of the gala? They stood frozen, trapped in a nightmare they could not understand. They could not comprehend the massive shift in power. They could not comprehend that the solid ground beneath their feet had already vanished. Before DeAndre could formulate a single coherent word, before Kenzie could let out another desperate scream, before my mother could process her own total irrelevance, the heavy booming voice of the event MC echoed out from the main ballroom speakers. The sound system was impeccable, carrying the announcement crystal clear into the stunned, frozen foyer. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice boomed, cutting through the thick tension like a blade. "Please take your seats. We have a special announcement from the primary financial backer of tonight's event." The silence in the ballroom was profound. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. It was the silence of a collapsing empire. It was the silence of total, inescapable ruin. DeAndre broke it first. He backed away from the edge of the stage, his hands raised defensively as the investors at the nearest tables descended upon him. They descended like a pack of starving wolves. They did not care about his custom tuxedo. They did not care about his charming practiced smile. They did not care about the lavish spread of caviar and vintage champagne he had provided. They wanted their money. They wanted their millions. They wanted the investments he had swallowed whole. He cowered against the edge of a velvet-draped table, stammering out frantic, disjointed lies. He babbled about temporary liquidity issues. He babbled about administrative errors. He babbled about market corrections. Nobody believed a single word. The illusion was dead. The golden boy of Chicago finance was dead. He was just a thief, backed into a corner pleading for his life. "Give me 1 week," he begged, his voice cracking with pathetic desperation as a billionaire real estate mogul grabbed him by the lapels. "Just give me 1 week to make things right. I can fix this. I can fix everything." He could not fix anything. He could not fix the truth burning brightly on the massive screens above us. He could not fix the fact that I held every single note of his debt. Across the room, the fallout was equally catastrophic for my sister. Kenzie was backed into a dark corner of the ballroom, her arms wrapped tightly around her chest, as if trying to hold her shattering world together. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled. Her flawless makeup was ruined, thick black streams of mascara running down her cheeks, staining her expensive silk dress. Her sobs were loud. Her sobs were ragged. Her sobs were entirely ignored. The wealthy elite influencer friends she had invited to witness her triumph were not rushing to comfort her. They were not offering words of solace. They were holding up their smartphones. They were zooming in on her tear-stained face. They were broadcasting her ruin live to millions of followers. They were capturing every second of her spectacular fall from grace. The golden child was broken. The golden child was completely, utterly broken. But the most visceral reaction came from the woman sitting directly in front of the stage, Catherine. My mother sat frozen, her eyes darting frantically between the glaring red foreclosure notices on the digital screens and my calm, steady face. The reality of the numbers was finally penetrating her thick armor of denial. She realized she had lost her home. She realized she had lost her savings. She realized she had lost her legacy. Every dollar she had hoarded, every ounce of status she had weaponized against me was gone. Wiped out by her own greed, wiped out by her blind worship of a fraudster. And then something shifted inside her. The arrogant, untouchable matriarch vanished. The woman who had spent 35 years calling me a disappointment, who had ordered me out the back door just minutes ago, simply ceased to exist. Seeing that rage would no longer work, seeing that intimidation was useless against the billionaire CEO standing above her, Catherine resorted to the only tactic she had left: pathetic, raw desperation. She slid out of her chair and collapsed onto her knees in the middle of the ballroom. She did not care that hundreds of the city's elite were watching. She did not care about her dignity. She crawled. She crawled forward on the champagne-soaked carpet. She crawled past the furious, shouting investors. She crawled toward the stage, her hands reaching out blindly. Richard tried to follow her, pushing his way roughly through the chaotic crowd. His face was a mask of furious, terrified disbelief. He marched toward the stage, his fists clenched tight at his sides, his face red with bulging veins. "You set us up!" Richard screamed over the din of the ballroom, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger at me. "You planned this to destroy us. You are a monster. You are a monster." I ignored him entirely. My eyes were fixed on the woman pulling herself up the first 3 steps of the stage. Catherine reached the edge of the platform and lunged forward, her manicured fingers grasping frantically at the hem of my emerald silk gown. She clung to the fabric as if it were a life raft in a raging ocean. Her face was tilted up toward me, contorted in an ugly mask of pure terror. "Lily, my baby." Catherine sobbed, her voice a hysterical, grating pitch that echoed through the surrounding chaos. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. We did not know. We swear we did not know he was a fraud. You have to believe us." She wept openly, her tears soaking into the fabric of my dress. She gripped my gown tighter, pulling herself slightly higher, her knuckles turning white from the strain. "You are a billionaire," she pleaded, her words tumbling over each other in a frantic rush. "You own the debt. You have all the power, Lily. Please just cancel the foreclosure. You can stop this. Save your sister. Save our house. We are family, Lily. Family helps family. Please, I am begging you. Family helps family. Family helps family. Family helps family." The words were a grotesque mockery of every moment I had spent begging for their basic affection. She was begging the scapegoat. She was pleading with the daughter she had thrown away. She was demanding salvation from the very person she had tried to bury. For years I had craved her validation. For years I had starved for her love. For years I had accepted the crumbs they threw at me, convincing myself it was a feast. Now the feast was mine, and they were the ones starving. The sheer spectacle of her breakdown commanded the room's attention. The furious shouting of the investors began to die down. The panicked babbles from DeAndre faded away. Even Kenzie's ragged sobs grew quieter. One by one, the elite guests stopped their screaming and turned their attention back to the stage. The entire ballroom went dead silent. Hundreds of pairs of eyes locked onto the tableau unfolding under the blazing spotlight. A ruined mother on her knees clutching the dress of the billionaire CEO daughter she had discarded. They were all waiting. The investors were waiting. My elite security guards were waiting. My terrified sister, trembling in the corner, was waiting. My furious father, frozen in the aisle, was waiting. They were waiting to see what I would do. They were waiting to see if the powerful, untouchable CEO would cave to her mother's tears. They were waiting to see if the ingrained toxic pull of family loyalty would force me to surrender my hard-won victory. They wanted to see if the scapegoat would fold. I did not flinch. I did not pull my dress away. I stood absolutely still, looking down at my mother's grasping, desperate hands. I looked at the dark streaks of makeup running down her face. I looked at the utter destruction of the woman who had made my life a living hell. I felt no pity. I felt no guilt. I felt no hesitation. I felt only an absolute icy detachment. Slowly, deliberately, I leaned down toward the microphone. I looked directly into Richard's furious eyes and then down at Catherine's weeping face. "I didn't forge your signatures, Richard," I said, my voice echoing coldly through the cavernous, silent ballroom. "I didn't lie to your investors. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see the rats scurrying in the dark." I looked down at the woman weeping at my feet. The great Catherine, the undisputed queen of her suburban country club. The woman who had meticulously curated an image of flawless wealth was now a crumpled, sobbing mess on a hotel ballroom floor. Her expensive manicure clawed desperately at the emerald silk of my custom gown, her knuckles white with the sheer force of her panic. Her tears left dark, wet stains on the fabric, but I felt absolutely no inclination to reach down and comfort her. The maternal bond she was desperately trying to invoke had been severed decades ago by her own ruthless ambitions. I reached down, my movements slow, deliberate, and entirely devoid of affection. I placed my hands over her trembling fingers. For a fleeting second, a spark of wild hope ignited in her swollen, tear-filled eyes. She thought I was going to help her up. She thought I was going to embrace her. She thought the obedient, desperate to please daughter she had crushed under her heel had magically returned to save her. Instead, I clamped my hands around her wrists and peeled her fingers off my dress. I was gentle but possessing an underlying strength that brooked absolutely no resistance. I pulled my silk skirt out of her grasp and stepped back, leaving her hands clutching at nothing but empty air. "You did not apologize when you stole my college tuition to pay for Kenzie's extravagant European vacation," I said. My voice was not a shout. It was perfectly level, ringing out with terrifying, emotionless clarity through the state-of-the-art sound system. Every single syllable struck the silent ballroom, like the tolling of an execution bell. Catherine flinched violently as if I had struck her across the face. You did not apologize when you left me to eat alone in a cold, empty house on Christmas Eve, because my presence did not fit the perfect family aesthetic you wanted to project to your wealthy friends. I continued my gaze, pinning her to the floor. You never once apologized for the decades of neglect, the constant humiliation, or the systematic way you tried to erase my existence to make room for your golden child. I took another step back, severing the physical proximity between us entirely. You are not sorry you hurt me, Catherine, I stated, stripping away the very last shred of her dignity. You are only sorry that you have absolutely no money left. You are weeping because the illusion is dead, and you are terrified of becoming the very thing you have spent your entire life mocking. You are terrified of being poor. A collective shuddering gasp rippled through the audience. The elite investors, the tech moguls, the socialites. They all watched in morbid fascination as the matriarch of the supposedly prestigious family was laid bare, exposed as a hollow, financially ruined fraud. I turned my attention away from the pathetic figure on the floor. I shifted my gaze toward the corner of the room, fixing my eyes directly on Kenzie and DeAndre. DeAndre was currently pinned against a velvet-draped table by three furious investors demanding their millions back, his custom tuxedo rumpled and soaked with spilled champagne. Kenzie was huddled behind him, her arms wrapped around her knees, violently sobbing as her mascara ran in thick, ugly black streams down her pale face. The glittering, untouchable power couple had been reduced to cornered, terrified animals. DeAndre. I called out, my voice slicing through the angry muttering of the crowd. He snapped his head toward me, his eyes wide, wild, and begging for a lifeline that did not exist. I am calling the loan, I announced, watching the last drop of blood drain from his face. All of it. Every single cent. The cross-collateralization agreements your wife and her parents signed are ironclad. By 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, Onyx Capital will officially legally seize your assets. We will take the cars. We will take the offshore accounts. We will take the mansion you bought with stolen money. Kenzie let out a piercing, hysterical wail, burying her face in her hands. DeAndre shook his head frantically, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly as the reality of federal prison and total bankruptcy crushed the last of his arrogant spirit. You have 12 hours to pack your bags, I decreed, delivering the final fatal sentence. Do not attempt to take anything that belongs to my firm, which is as of this exact moment absolutely everything. From the center aisle, a roar of pure, uncontrolled fury erupted. Richard, who had been frozen in a state of catatonic shock, finally snapped. The realization that his retirement, his home, and his entire financial future had been obliterated pushed him into a blind, reckless rage. You cannot do this! Richard screamed, his face a terrifying shade of purple, the veins in his neck bulging as he strained against the invisible barrier of my authority. You cannot do this to your own family. We gave you life. You are our daughter. You cannot do this to your own blood. He pointed a shaking, accusatory finger at me, demanding the very loyalty he had spent a lifetime denying me. The sheer, blinding hypocrisy of his demand hung heavy in the stifling air of the ballroom. I looked down at the furious, red-faced man who had never once stood up for me, never once protected me, and never once treated me like anything other than an inconvenient burden. The icy calm washing over me was absolute. It was the armor I had forged in the fires of their rejection, and it was entirely impenetrable. Blood makes you related, Richard? I replied, my voice ringing with brutal, unwavering finality. Loyalty makes you family. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to absorb the absolute truth of my words. You lost your daughter a very long time ago, I said, staring directly into his panicked, raging eyes. Today, you just lost your creditor. Richard staggered backward, clutching his chest as if the words had physically impaled him. The entire ballroom held its breath, trapped in the gravitational pull of my family's total spectacular annihilation. The victory was absolute. The revenge was complete. The empire of lies was nothing but smoking ash. But before the silence could break, Before the security team could begin ushering the ruined frauds out the door, a massive resounding crash echoed from the back of the ballroom. The heavy, ornate mahogany doors swung open with explosive, violent force, slamming against the walls and shaking the crystal chandeliers above. Every single head in the room snapped toward the entrance. Through the wide-open doorway, a formidable procession entered the grand ballroom. At the very center, navigating the plush carpet with ruthless mechanical precision, was an electric wheelchair. Sitting in that wheelchair, looking frail but possessing an aura of terrifying, undeniable authority, was Grandpa Henry. He was not alone. He was flanked on all sides by a phalanx of men and women in impeccably tailored razor-sharp suits. They moved with the synchronized lethal grace of a high-powered corporate legal team. The angry mob of investors, the stunned socialites, the hovering hotel staff, they all instinctively stepped back. The massive crowd parted seamlessly, creating a wide, clear path down the center aisle, parting for the old man like the Red Sea. The quiet hum of the motors on Grandpa Henry's wheelchair was the only sound cutting through the stunned silence of the cavernous space. He rolled forward, a frail figure, wrapped in a sharply tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair neatly combed back. Yet despite his physical frailty, the aura of absolute authority he projected was suffocating. The high-powered corporate lawyers walking in lockstep beside him carried thick leather briefcases, their expressions unreadable masks of professional intimidation. They moved with predatory grace, forming an impenetrable wall around the patriarch. Richard let out a massive, shuddering breath of relief. The color rushed violently back into his pale face. He genuinely believed his savior had arrived. He genuinely believed that the traditional hierarchy of the Harrington family was about to reassert itself, putting the rebellious, out-of-control daughter firmly back in her place. Catherine scrambled to her feet, wiping the ruined makeup from her cheeks, a frantic, hopeful smile stretching across her trembling lips. "Dad?" Richard yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of desperation and sudden arrogant confidence. He lunged forward, stopping just short of the legal team's invisible barrier. "Dad, thank God you are here. You have to stop her. Look at what she is doing. Tell her to stop. She has lost her mind. She is ruining the family." Catherine nodded vigorously, clasping her hands together in a frantic, prayerful gesture. "She bought DeAndre's debt just to humiliate us, Henry. She is trying to throw us out on the street. You have to talk some sense into her." Grandpa Henry brought his wheelchair to a smooth, silent halt right at the base of the stage. He did not look at my mother. He slowly raised his gaze to meet Richard's frantic, pleading eyes. The look on my grandfather's weathered face was not one of paternal concern. It was a look of absolute, unadulterated disgust. It was the look a man gives to a parasite he is about to scrape off his shoe. "She isn't ruining the family," Richard Grandpa Henry said. His voice was raspy, but it projected with a terrifying, gravelly strength that commanded the attention of every single billionaire and socialite in the room. "She is cleansing it." Richard stumbled back a half step, shaking his head, entirely unable to process the words. "Dad, what are you talking about? She is destroying everything we built." "You built nothing," Henry barked, slamming his gnarled hand down on the armrest of his wheelchair. "You inherited a kingdom and treated it like a playground. But worse than your financial incompetence was your moral bankruptcy. I watched you for years. I watched how you treated your own flesh and blood. I watched you elevate a vapid, cruel girl in Kenzie while systematically trying to break Lily's spirit." He gestured to the lead lawyer beside him, who immediately snapped open his briefcase and produced a thick stack of legally binding documents. 10 years ago, Grandpa Henry continued, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "I realized the Harrington legacy was rotting from the inside out. I needed to know if there was anyone in this bloodline actually worthy of carrying the name. So I orchestrated a test, an elaborate, highly classified stress test." Loud gasps rippled through the crowd. Investors leaned forward, desperate to catch every word of the family drama unfolding before them. "I did not lose my fortune in the market crash." Henry revealed, his eyes locking onto Richard's sweating face. "I hid it. I transferred the bulk of my wealth into blind trusts and offshore holding companies. I manufactured a financial crisis to see exactly what you would all do when the chips were down. I wanted to see who possessed true character. Catherine let out a whimpering gasp, her hands flying to cover her mouth. The horrifying realization of what she had thrown away for the sake of cheap appearances was finally hitting her. And you failed, Henry spat, his disgust palpable. You failed spectacularly. The moment you thought the money was gone, you turned into ravenous wolves. You sold out your own daughter. You worshipped status. You pandered to a cheap con artist like DeAndre because he wore a nice watch and drove a leased sports car. Henry turned his wheelchair slightly, looking up at me where I stood on the stage. The coldness in his eyes melted away entirely, replaced by a deep, profound pride. But Lily, he said, his voice softening just a fraction. Lily took the absolute worst you had to offer. You threw her to the wolves and she returned leading the pack. She built an empire from nothing, relying on her own brilliance and resilience. She proved that she is the only one in this room who understands the true value of hard work. He turned back to the crowd, grabbing a microphone offered by one of his attorneys. "Let it be a matter of public record," Grandpa Henry announced, his voice booming over the speakers. "As of this morning, I have officially and permanently restructured my estate. Richard, Catherine, Kenzie, and DeAndre are permanently struck from my will. You will not receive a single dime. You will not receive a single property. You are entirely cut off." Kenzie let out another high-pitched wail, collapsing against the wall as her final safety net was incinerated in front of her eyes. "You worshipped money," Henry declared, delivering the final crushing blow. "So I let money destroy you. Lily is the sole heir to the Harrington Trust because she built her worth through grit, not greed." The finality of his words hung heavily in the air. Richard dropped to his knees, burying his face in his hands, completely broken. The Golden family of Chicago high society had been stripped of their wealth, their status, and their dignity in a matter of minutes. They were nothing but empty husks. Suddenly, a piercing high-decibel wail cut through the heavy silence of the ballroom. It was not Kenzie. It was not my mother. It was the sharp, unmistakable shriek of sirens blaring outside the Sterling Hotel. The sound multiplied rapidly. One siren became two, then four, then a chaotic chorus of overlapping alarms hurtling toward the building. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the grand ballroom, the frantic strobing of red and blue lights began to reflect off the crystal chandeliers, and the polished glass casting erratic, frantic shadows across the faces of the terrified guests. DeAndre snapped his head toward the windows. The color drained from his face until he looked like a corpse in a custom tuxedo. The momentary shock of the disinheritance vanished instantly, replaced by the primal, paralyzing terror of a cornered criminal who realizes his time is up. The authorities were not here for a noise complaint. They were here for the man running a massive, fraudulent Ponzi scheme. He looked at Kenzie weeping on the floor. He looked at my parents kneeling in shock. He did not spare a single second to help them. DeAndre spun on his heels, his eyes darting wildly until they locked onto the heavy swinging doors leading to the catering kitchens. He bolted. DeAndre sprinted with the clumsy, desperate gait of a man who knew his entire life was over. He slammed his hands against the brass push plates of the heavy kitchen doors. But before the wood could even swing outward, the doors exploded inward with terrifying, overwhelming force. DeAndre was thrown backward, landing hard on his back. Through the open doorway poured a tactical wave of dark windbreakers and heavy Kevlar vests. The bold yellow letters FBI glowed starkly against the dark fabric. DeAndre Washington, the lead agent, barked his voice, carrying the unmistakable booming weight of federal authority. "Do not move another inch." DeAndre scrambled backward like a crab, his expensive Italian loafers finding no purchase on the champagne-slicked carpet. He tried to pivot and scramble toward a side exit, but two agents descended on him in a blur of calculated violence. They tackled the golden boy of Chicago venture capital directly to the floor. The sickening thud of his face hitting the hardwood subfloor resonated clearly through the ballroom. The crisp, tailored lines of his custom tuxedo ripped violently at the shoulder. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, gross embezzlement, and the forgery of classified financial documents," the agent recited, pulling DeAndre's arms violently behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs locking into place was the loudest sound in the entire room. The wealthy investors, the men and women DeAndre had spent the entire evening schmoozing, watched his brutal subjugation with cold, calculating eyes. Nobody stepped forward to help him. Nobody protested his innocence. They simply pulled out their smartphones, taking photos, and sending frantic, hushed emails to their own legal teams. From the far corner, a blood-curdling scream shattered the air. Kenzie launched herself forward. She was entirely unhinged, her face a horrific mask of ruined makeup and pure primal panic. "Get your hands off him!" she shrieked, clawing her way blindly through the parting crowd. "You cannot do this. Do you know who we are? He is a billionaire. Let him go." She lunged at the federal agent, pinning her husband. Before her perfectly manicured nails could even make contact, a female officer stepped smoothly into her path. The officer caught Kenzie by the wrists, twisting her arms firmly but expertly behind her back, pinning her securely in place. Kenzie thrashed wildly, her designer gown ripping at the side seam, her expensive high heels kicking uselessly at the empty air. She screamed obscenities, sobbing and thrashing, reduced in seconds from a high society influencer to a raving, hysterical spectacle. DeAndre was hauled roughly to his feet. His nose was bleeding freely down his chin. His eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated terror. He looked at Kenzie but offered no comfort. He looked at my parents, but offered no apology. The federal agents dragged him away, marching him straight down the center aisle of his own ruined gala. His reputation, his freedom, and his entire fabricated existence were completely obliterated. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind the agents, sealing his fate. I turned my attention away from the doors and back to the front row. The reality of the evening was finally taking root in the minds of my parents. The spectacle of DeAndre being hauled away in federal cuffs was the final lethal nail in their coffin. Grandpa Henry raised a single frail finger. From the phalanx of high-powered corporate lawyers flanking his wheelchair, my lead attorney stepped forward. He did not walk with the hurried, anxious pace of the investors. He walked with the slow, deliberate rhythm of an executioner. He held a thick, crisp legal envelope in his right hand. He stopped exactly 1 foot in front of Richard and Catherine. My mother was still trembling on her knees, her eyes darting wildly around the room. My father was entirely frozen, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Richard and Catherine Harrington, the attorney, said, his voice smooth and entirely devoid of any human empathy. He held out the envelope. Richard's hands were shaking so violently he could not even raise them to take it. The attorney simply dropped the heavy envelope. It landed with a dull smack directly on Richard's chest before falling to the floor between his expensive shoes. "That is your official notice of immediate eviction and total asset seizure," the attorney stated, speaking loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear every single damning word. "As co-signers on Mr. Washington's fraudulent subprime loans, your primary residence, your retirement accounts, and all cross-collateralized assets now legally belong to Onyx Capital. You have 12 hours to vacate the premises. At exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, the county sheriff will physically lock the doors of your estate." They had lost it all. In the span of 30 agonizing minutes, they had lost their sprawling suburban mansion. They had lost their life savings. They had lost their golden, untouchable son-in-law to the federal penitentiary. They had lost the massive inheritance they had spent decades manipulating to secure. Catherine stared blindly at the thick white envelope on the floor. She stared at the bold black legal print visible through the window. The realization struck her with the devastating force of a freight train. She was no longer a wealthy socialite. She was no longer the queen of her country club. She was completely broke. She was homeless. She was publicly disgraced in front of every single person she had ever tried to impress. The air rushed out of Catherine's lungs in a high, wheezing gasp. Her eyes rolled back into her head, showing only the whites. Her body went completely limp, folding in on itself like a discarded marionette. She collapsed sideways onto the champagne-soaked carpet, fainting dead away in the middle of the ballroom floor. Richard did not drop down to catch her. He did not yell for a doctor. He simply stood there, a hollow, empty shell of a man, staring blankly down at his unconscious wife. His mind had completely shattered under the weight of his own hubris. I looked down at the toxic wreckage of my family. I saw my sister sobbing hysterically in the firm grip of a police officer. I saw my mother lying unconscious in a ruined designer dress. I saw my father paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his own greed and spectacular failure. I felt no urge to call for the paramedics. I felt no urge to offer a comforting hand. The bond was gone. The obligation was gone. The trauma they had inflicted upon me for decades had finally been repaid in full. I stepped down from the stage, my emerald silk gown gliding smoothly over the carpeted steps. I walked over to Grandpa Henry. He looked up at me, his weathered face reflecting a profound, quiet understanding. The rot had been surgically removed. The family legacy was safe. I reached down and took the firm rubber handles of his wheelchair. I did not look back at Richard. I did not look back at Catherine. I pushed the wheelchair forward, walking tall and straight, flanked securely by the team of attorneys. The remaining crowd parted for us in absolute silence, clearing a wide path toward the main exit. Together we walked out the front doors of the grand ballroom, stepping out into the cold, crisp winter air, leaving the toxic wreckage of our family behind forever. 48 hours later, the crisp winter air hovering over the prestigious North Shore estates carried the distinct, unmistakable scent of total ruin. The imposing wrought iron gates of the mansion DeAndre had purchased with stolen funds stood wide open. Instead of a fleet of luxury catering vans or imported European sports cars, a single aggressively yellow moving truck was parked awkwardly on the pristine cobblestone driveway. Federal agents had already swept the property, executing their warrants with brutal efficiency and legally seizing every single item of value. The designer handbags, the diamond tennis bracelets, the imported Italian furniture, the fleet of vehicles, everything was gone. Kenzie was left with absolutely nothing but the harsh, unforgiving reality of her new life. She stumbled down the grand marble front steps, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. She was not wearing custom couture. She was not draped in cashmere. She was wearing faded, shapeless sweatpants and a worn-out college sweatshirt she had dug out of a donation bin. Instead of matching sets of Louis Vuitton luggage, her manicured hands, now chipped and broken, dragged heavy black plastic garbage bags across the driveway. The thick plastic scraped loudly against the stone, a pathetic grating sound that echoed through the quiet, wealthy neighborhood. She was sobbing. They were not the pretty, carefully curated tears she used for her apology videos online. They were ugly, heaving gasps that racked her entire body and left her gasping for air. Her smartphone had been confiscated as federal evidence. Her professional ring light was gone. Her millions of followers were currently devouring the sensational news of her husband's massive fraud, tearing her reputation to shreds in the comment sections of every social media platform. The glamorous, untouchable influencer life she had built entirely on a foundation of lies and stolen money was dead. It was not just paused or canceled, it was permanently eradicated. The wealthy neighbors she had spent years looking down upon were now standing casually on their manicured lawns, sipping expensive coffee and watching her humiliating exit with cold, fascinated detachment. Further down the sweeping driveway, the situation was equally catastrophic for my parents. Richard and Catherine were not directing a team of professional movers with white gloves. They were doing the grueling physical labor themselves. A battered, rust-spotted U-Haul truck idled loudly behind Kenzie, its exhaust pipe belching dark gray smoke into the pristine suburban air. My mother, a woman who had not lifted anything heavier than a crystal champagne flute in 30 years, was struggling to hoist a taped cardboard box into the back of the truck. Her face was red, puffy, and streaked with sweat. The perfect, effortless elegance she had cultivated for decades had vanished, entirely replaced by the panicked, frantic energy of a cornered rat. They were not moving to a smaller luxury condo. They were not downsizing to a chic downtown loft. Onyx Capital had seized every single bank account, every hidden trust, and every property attached to DeAndre's toxic loans. They had managed to scrape together just enough cash by pawning Catherine's remaining unseized jewelry to secure the first month's rent on a tiny rundown two-bedroom apartment on the extreme industrial outskirts of the city. The reality of their new existence was violently crushing them. They were in their 60s, entirely devoid of marketable skills, stripped of their massive social circle, and staring down the barrel of living paycheck to paycheck for the rest of their miserable lives. The tension between them was palpable, toxic, and highly explosive. Catherine dropped the cardboard box onto the metal floor of the truck and rounded on my father. Her voice was shrill, echoing sharply across the driveway. "This is your fault," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Richard. "You told me he was a financial genius. You told me the investments were completely secure. You handed him everything we owned because you wanted to brag to the board members at the country club." Richard slammed his own box down his face, contorting with equal fury. "Do not you dare put this entirely on me, Catherine!" He roared back, the veins in his neck bulging dangerously. "You pushed for this. You wanted the bigger house. You wanted to throw those lavish parties just to humiliate Lily. You worshipped the ground DeAndre walked on because he bought you expensive gifts. You traded our actual capable daughter for a con artist because he fit your pathetic, shallow aesthetic." Their bitter, vicious arguments bounced off the stone walls of the mansion they were being legally evicted from. They blamed each other. They blamed DeAndre. They blamed the federal government. But the underlying truth was inescapable. They had sacrificed their only loyal child on the altar of their own insatiable greed, and now they were paying the ultimate, devastating price. Miles away from the pathetic spectacle unfolding on the North Shore, I sat in the absolute silence of my corner office at Onyx Capital. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, commanding view of the Chicago skyline, the city stretching out beneath me like a conquered territory. The heavy mahogany desk was clear. My morning meetings were concluded, and the hostile takeover of the Harrington assets was proceeding flawlessly. The quiet hum of the climate control was the only sound in the massive space. Then the private unlisted phone line sitting on the edge of my desk lit up. I did not move immediately. I simply watched the screen flash. Only a handful of people possessed that specific number. I leaned forward and tapped the speaker button, letting the voicemail connect. The sound of ragged, hysterical sobbing instantly filled the serene space of my office. Lily, a voice pleaded, cracking under the weight of pure desperation. It was Kenzie. She had somehow managed to beg, borrow, or steal a phone to track down my direct line. "Lily, please, it is me. You have to listen to me." Her voice was unrecognizable. The arrogant, dismissive tone she had used her entire life was entirely gone. She was begging. "Please, I have absolutely nothing left. They took everything. DeAndre is gone. The house is gone. My friends will not even answer my calls. I am sleeping on an air mattress in a cheap motel. I need help, Lily. I know I was awful. I know I treated you terribly. But we are sisters. You have to help me. I am begging you. Just give me a job. Any job. I will be a receptionist. I will fetch coffee. I will clean the floors at your building. I will do anything, Lily. Please, I have nothing." Her desperate, pathetic pleas echoed against the glass walls of my office. I listened to the entire message. I listened to her hyperventilating. I listened to the sound of her crying, the sound of a woman who finally realized that actions have permanent, unavoidable consequences. I felt absolutely nothing. I felt no pity. I felt no vindication. I felt no lingering sense of familial obligation. She was a stranger, and she was a stranger who had tried to destroy me. I reached forward and tapped the glowing screen. I deleted the voicemail without a single second of hesitation. My finger moved smoothly to the settings menu, and I permanently blocked the number. The boundary was absolute. The wall I had built around my life, my peace, and my empire was entirely impenetrable. There are absolutely no second chances for abusers. I stood up, smoothed the front of my tailored suit, and turned my back on the phone, looking out over the city that was finally completely mine. Exactly 1 year passed. The turning of the calendar brought a brutal, unrelenting justice to the people who had spent my entire life trying to bury me. DeAndre Washington did not get a slap on the wrist. He did not get a comfortable minimum security country club prison. The federal judge presiding over his case was notoriously unforgiving toward white-collar criminals who preyed on the elderly and the desperate. When the gavel finally fell, DeAndre was sentenced to 15 consecutive years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The courtroom artists captured the exact moment his arrogant facade shattered, rendering him a weeping, pathetic shell of the financial titan he had pretended to be. There were no appeals left. There was no hidden stash of cash to buy his way out. He was reduced to an inmate number locked away in a concrete cell, stripped of his custom suits and his stolen millions. His downfall inevitably dragged my sister into the very gutter she had spent her life mocking. Kenzie, completely incapable of coping with actual poverty, found herself entirely alone. Her wealthy influencer friends had abandoned her the second the federal indictments went public, treating her like a contagious disease. With no skills, no education, and a ruined reputation, she had no choice but to take the only job that would hire her. She now works double shifts at a greasy, brightly lit fast food franchise just off the interstate. Her days of unboxing designer bags are gone, replaced by the relentless, humiliating reality of wearing a polyester uniform that permanently smells of old frying oil. Her perfectly manicured hands are calloused and burned from the grill. But the true torture for Kenzie is not the grueling labor. It is the audience. Her former followers, the millions of teenagers and young women who used to hang on her every word, now pull up to the drive-through window, specifically to mock her. They hold up their smartphones, recording her as she hands over paper bags of cheap food, laughing as she tries to hide her face under her visor. They post the videos online with cruel hashtags, documenting every single agonizing second of her spectacular fall from grace. She is a living, breathing cautionary tale. My parents did not fare any better. The stress of total financial ruin and the impending threat of Richard's criminal prosecution for forging the Harrington Trust documents shattered whatever fragile bond remained in their marriage. They are entirely estranged now, though they are forced to share the same cramped, decaying two-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city, because neither can afford to live alone. They are drowning in a bottomless ocean of legal debt, their meager Social Security checks garnished to pay the aggressive defense attorneys struggling to keep Richard out of a prison cell next to his beloved son-in-law. Winter hit them particularly hard. I received a report from my private investigator last week. Richard and Catherine spend their days wrapped in cheap blankets, fighting over the thermostat in a freezing, drafty apartment because they cannot afford the heating bill. They sit in the suffocating silence of their shared misery, eating canned soup and staring at the peeling wallpaper. Their country club memberships are gone. Their elite social circle erased their names from their contact lists. They reap the bitter, inescapable harvest of their decades of blinding favoritism and unadulterated greed. They traded their only loyal daughter for a fleeting illusion of prestige, and now they have absolutely nothing but the cold, echoing consequences of their own choices. While they suffocated in the wreckage of their own making, I soared. Onyx Capital did not just survive the upheaval of the Harrington acquisition, it thrived. Under my absolute control, the firm aggressively expanded its portfolio, dominating the venture capital landscape and swallowing up weakened competitors with ruthless efficiency. We transitioned from a highly successful private firm into a globally recognized multi-billion-dollar financial empire. Last month, my face was featured on the cover of Forbes magazine. The headline declared me one of the most powerful and ruthless women in global finance. The article detailed my hostile takeover, praising my strategic brilliance and my unwavering refusal to capitulate to emotional manipulation. I bought a dozen copies and placed them in the lobby of my headquarters, a quiet, undeniable testament to the empire I built through raw grit, sleepless nights, and an absolute refusal to be a victim. But the money and this prestige are secondary to the real victory. I took a significant portion of the Harrington Trust, the very money my parents tried to steal, and funneled it into a massive philanthropic initiative. I established a series of comprehensive, fully funded scholarships, specifically designed for young women who have survived financial abuse, familial neglect, and toxic households. We provide them with full tuition housing and aggressive financial literacy training. I am ensuring that women who have been cast aside and told they are worthless are given the exact tools they need to build their own impenetrable empires. I am turning the very pain my family inflicted upon me into a weapon of mass empowerment for others. Now it is Christmas Eve again. The city outside my penthouse is blanketed in a pristine, glittering layer of fresh snow. It is the exact anniversary of the night Catherine threw me out into the cold, the night she told me I was a disappointment for not bringing a wealthy man to her flawless dinner table. The irony is as sweet as it is profound. I am hosting a dinner party tonight. My massive custom-built dining table is set with the finest crystal heavy silver and imported porcelain. The smell of roasted meats and expensive spices fills the warm, brightly lit space. A massive fir tree stands in the corner, sparkling with thousands of tiny white lights. But the guest list is entirely different. I stand by the crackling fireplace, a glass of vintage red wine in my hand, listening to the sound of genuine raucous laughter echoing down the hallway as the elevator doors open. The polished steel doors of my private penthouse elevator slid open with a soft melodic chime, instantly filling my quiet foyer with a burst of joyous, unfiltered noise. Sarah, my brilliant chief operating officer, stepped out first. She was carrying a rare vintage bottle of Bordeaux, her booming laugh echoing off the Venetian plaster walls. Right behind her was Marcus, the razor-sharp lead attorney who had personally handed my parents their eviction notice 1 year ago. Tonight he had traded his intimidating courtroom armor for an obnoxiously bright, light-up holiday sweater, completely breaking his usual stoic character. Then came Eleanor, the fiercely independent venture capitalist who had served as my toughest mentor. She was the woman who had looked at my very first business plan years ago and saw the undeniable potential that my own blood relatives had deliberately chosen to ignore. And finally, rolling his electric wheelchair over the threshold with a broad, unburdened smile lighting up his weathered face was Grandpa Henry. He looked exceptionally sharp in a navy blue tailored suit, a vibrant red silk pocket square tucked neatly into his breast pocket. The heavy, oppressive weight of the Harrington family legacy no longer dragged down his shoulders. He looked 10 years younger than he had on the night we utterly dismantled the empire of lies my parents had built. I stepped forward to greet them, taking coats and exchanging warm, genuine embraces. There was no underlying tension. There was no walking on eggshells, desperately trying to avoid a landmine of passive-aggressive insults. No one was scrutinizing my outfit to ensure it did not outshine anyone else. No one was preparing to loudly ask why I was still single at my age, or mockingly refer to my billion-dollar investment firm as a cute little hobby. We moved into the grand dining room. My massive, custom-built mahogany table was set meticulously with the finest crystal stemware, heavy antique silver, and imported porcelain plates. A towering, majestic fir tree stood proudly in the corner of the room, sparkling brilliantly with thousands of tiny white lights and reflecting off the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering Chicago skyline. The private chef I had hired for the evening began bringing out the feast. We were served course after course of culinary perfection. There was rich, creamy truffle risotto, perfectly seared prime rib that melted in the mouth, and buttery roasted winter vegetables seasoned with expensive spices. The smell of the incredible food mingled with the scent of fresh pine and the wood burning merrily in the massive stone fireplace. As we ate, the conversation flowed with a natural, effortless grace. We talked about our latest corporate acquisitions, the aggressive expansion of Onyx Capital, and the massive success of the philanthropic foundation I had launched. I looked around the table at these incredibly powerful, intelligent, and fiercely loyal people. I realized with absolute crystal clarity that this was what a real family looked like. True family was not built on the fragile, accidental foundation of shared DNA or the toxic, suffocating chains of unearned obligation. True family was forged in the fires of mutual respect built through shared struggles and cemented by absolute, unwavering loyalty. As the magnificent dinner began to wind down and the chef cleared the final plates to make way for dessert, Grandpa Henry reached over and gently tapped his crystal champagne flute with his silver fork. The bright, clear ringing sound instantly brought the joyful chatter of the room to a respectful halt. Every eye turned toward the head of the table. Henry smiled warmly, looking at each of us before his gaze settled firmly on me. His eyes gleamed with a profound, immeasurable pride that I had spent my entire childhood starving for, but had finally earned entirely on my own merits. He slowly raised his glass of vintage champagne, the golden bubbles catching the warm light of the chandelier overhead. "To blood that doesn't define us," Henry began, his raspy voice steady and carrying a deep, resonant emotional weight, "and to the strength that elevates us. You proved that success is the sweetest revenge, my dear." We all raised our glasses in unison. The heavy crystal clinked together in a harmonious, beautiful chime. We drank to the future, the room completely filled with genuine love, safety, and raucous laughter. It was a healing balm that washed over me completely and permanently, erasing the decades of bitter, freezing isolation I had endured at my parents' hostile dinner table. After dessert and coffee were served, I excused myself quietly and stepped out onto the expansive wraparound balcony of my penthouse. The icy, biting Chicago wind immediately whipped against my face, but I welcomed the sharp, bracing clarity of it. The snow was falling steadily from the dark sky, large white flakes drifting down to cover the bustling city below in a quiet, glowing blanket of pristine white. I leaned against the thick glass railing, staring out at the breathtaking view of the empire I had conquered. Suddenly, my phone vibrated sharply in the pocket of my silk trousers. I pulled the device out, the screen glowing brightly against the backdrop of the dark, cold night. It was an unknown local number. I knew exactly who was calling. It was Catherine. It was Christmas Eve, the exact anniversary of the night she had mercilessly thrown me out of her house. I knew she was likely using a cheap burner phone or a public payphone, shivering in her freezing, drafty apartment on the outskirts of the city. I knew she was calling to leave a pathetic, sobbing voicemail, desperately hoping to beg for holiday money or demanding a second chance that she absolutely did not deserve. I did not answer. I did not send the call to voicemail. I simply stared at the glowing screen for a fraction of a second, feeling nothing but a profound, unshakable indifference. I tapped the screen, deleting the incoming call and permanently blocking the unknown number without a single second of hesitation. I did not even bother to listen to the voicemail she inevitably left. The boundary I had built was absolute and impenetrable. There are no second chances for abusers. You do not invite a parasite back into your home after you have spent years pulling it out of your skin. I dropped the phone back into my pocket, dismissing Catherine from my mind forever. I closed my eyes and took a deep, grounding breath, filling my lungs with the crisp, clean winter air and the pure, unadulterated taste of total freedom. I smiled a genuine, deeply peaceful smile. I turned my back on the cold, dark night and confidently walked back inside, stepping into the bright, beautiful warmth of the people who truly value me. The cycle of abuse was broken permanently. I was finally completely free.